Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was the Canary with a Hero's Voice? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Present Mix Radio Show. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1830 to 1930. Canary's Hour. Present Mike. Canary, yay. Present Mike, 6:30. And we all know what that means. Canary, I should be doing my homework. Present Mike, why yay? That's not what you're supposed to say. Faint scribbling sounds can be heard. Present Mike, are you actually doing your homework? Canary, well, someone set us a massive English essay. Present Mike, you're fluent in English. Canary, that I thought would be acceptable to leave until last minute for precisely that reason. But then I remembered it's due on a Friday and therefore leaving it until last minute would mean I have to do it on a Thursday evening, and here we are. Silence follows as the scribbling continues. Present Mike, okay, are you actually going to? Canary, almost finished. Present Mike, what's it on again? Canary, you were the one who said it. Present Mike, I have a lot on my shoulders and... Canary, whatever you say, cockatoo. Frantic tweeting noises. Canary, yes, thank you, siren, but if you poop on my work I will disown you. Present Mike, I think I need a pet bird too. Flapping followed by a yelp, Canary's muffled laughter and siren squawks. Present Mike, pet was not an insult. I repeat, pet was not an insult. Canary, I think siren has an intelligence quirk. She is way too smart for her own good. Present Mike, I meant I need a bird companion too. A tense silence ended by a satisfied tweet and a sigh of relief. Canary, finished. Can I hand it in now? Present Mike, no. Because I will lose it, guaranteed. Canary sighs and a rustling of paper indicates he has shoved his work into a backpack. Present Mike, anyway, moving on. We have a show to get to. First things first, as always, let us begin with our weekly talk with one of you lucky listeners. Canary, I know what you guys are plotting and I swear, I will hang up. Present Mike, I'm just going to pretend I didn't hear that and let's see if our listener picks up. A ringtone can be heard, one which siren repeats dutifully in the background. Listener, huh? Present Mike, you have made it all the way to our radio show. Listener, great, so, Midoriya? Canary, oh my god, Taro, I literally just said. Listener Jiro, yeah, whatever, so anyway, what was the English essay on again? Canary sighs exasperatingly. Canary, you know what, in punishment, I'm not going to tell you. A collective groan can be heard from the listener's end. Canary, okay, someone in the radio station is putting you through every time any of you guys call, and to that someone, siren will find you and make your life a living hell. Siren tweets in agreement. Present Mike, well, you get one question that is not school-related, Jiro. Listener Jiro, sure, why Canary? You could have chosen literally any other bird name out there, and you went for Canary, why? Canary, oh, that's an easy one. Let me tell you a story. In a tradition dating back to 1911, canaries were the heroes of the underground, known for the capture of a silent killer and for being the saviors of countless lives, all because of their singing. Deep in the coal mines, where men were hard at work, chipping away at the stone walls in search of a black gold, hanging from the ceiling were tiny cages, each inhabited by a little bird, a canary. The canaries would sing and sing, for it was all they knew. Trapped in that tiny box, incapable of flight, all they could do was sing. And so they sang. They sang and they sang their little hearts out, finding melody within the rhythmic beat of the miners' picks as they hit the walls mercilessly, desperate to find the fuel that would keep the cities alive and running. There were times when the miners would live for the singing of the canaries, a gentle reminder of the world above, of the morning sun and kind world they learned to love that little bit more as they spend so much time away from it. And so, when the singing stops, it's not hard to notice. The miners look up at the ceiling and see the little birds, collapsed in their cages, sounds no longer whistling from their throats. Carbon monoxide, the silent killer. The gas binds to blood instead of oxygen in a permanent fashion, meaning no matter how much more oxygen a person inhales, it would not satisfy them. It would never reach their cells, and they would die quickly, drifting off into an endless sleep. There are several reasons that canaries were killed by the gas before the miners. The first was the chemical makeup of a bird's blood. Whilst a human's red blood cells are formed from stem cells in the bone marrow, a bird's simply replicate themselves in the bloodstream. This means poison cells cannot easily be replaced like they can in a human. However, the more potent reason is the size of a canary, so small, so fragile. Less blood means more can be poisoned at a faster rate, meaning they drop dead before the miners. And so, leaving the little bodies of the birds deep in the mines, the men are evacuated before the gas can kill them too. The sweet sound of bird song, or the lack thereof, being the only reason that their descendants walk this earth today. Almost 2 years earlier, before the radio show, Midoriya sighed as he closed his book. He was procrastinating, learning about things he really didn't need to learn about, but when did that ever stop him? Anyway, all this talk of canaries and mines was far more interesting than any of the other facts he should have been committing to his mind. He was supposed to be going over his history work. He was far ahead of the rest of the class, but one of the things he could never have known for sure was what was to be on UA's entrance exam, and he could never be too careful. He needed to get into general studies. UA was his first step to... He glanced up at the poster of All Might looming over his computer. He'd taken the rest of them down. But he couldn't bring himself to completely free his room of memorabilia, and so, the poster remained. Becoming a hero. No. It was a childish dream. It was about time he gave up and wish for a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive of the roof of the building. And focused on a more realistic goal. It's good to have dreams, but make sure they're attainable. Attainable. Izuku. Midoriya jumped, almost falling off his chair. Can I come in, Izuku? He didn't say anything, so his mother let his door creak open. Still studying? She frowned. Inko carried a bowl of ramen into his room and slid it in front of him. She pulled up a chair and sat to eat her own bowl beside him. It took a moment, but eventually he picked up the chopsticks and began to eat too. If you overwork yourself, or you won't be able to perform as well as I know you can in the exam tomorrow, his mother insisted. I'm sorry, Mum, Midoriya said in an impossibly quiet voice. It was almost a miracle his mother heard him at all. Your brain is much like any of your other muscles. You wouldn't go for a run before a marathon. Why should you do the same for an exam? Your brain needs a rest. Midoriya smiled meekly and nodded. Good. If you can't sleep, do something different. Play one of your instruments. I don't mind what time of the night it is. Oh, as long as it's not the drums. Midoriya almost laughed. The smile was good enough for his mum. Maybe you could even sing. You know, I don't think I've ever heard you sing before, at least not in a long, long time. You should give it a try. He shook his head frantically, almost losing the noodles, halfway to his mouth. Why not, Izuku? You were so unsure about dance class at first, but that turned out to be really fun, remember? Singing's different, he protested, his voice still as quiet as a mouse. Why is that? Because to sing, I have to first talk. Inko sighed. She put down her chopsticks and gently rubbed her son's shoulders. You will get into you? I'm sure you will. And once you're there, you'll make lots of new friends. They won't be like the people at your old school. This is a hero school. Even if you're not on the hero course, no one there is going to say anything about your quirklessness. If they do, just tell one of the teachers and they will sort the problem out. The teachers are heroes, remember? You used to love heroes so much. You can't become a hero. She gazed up at the remaining All Might poster. Things are going to be different, she insisted, as if she was convincing herself of the fact. And then, maybe talking won't be so scary. Quirkless, useless, mute. But he wasn't mute, really. Midoriya could talk if he wanted to, right? But it was just so much easier to fade into the background, to not argue or complain. They pick on him less. He knew his place now, quiet, silent. But then that made it worse. He didn't understand why, but eventually his classmates realized he hadn't talked for months, that they didn't remember what his voice sounded like. Kakin noticed it too. He found it funny. So funny. And the teachers didn't care. They told him off for not speaking in class or not answering for the register in the morning. And suddenly the words became harder and harder to say. Uttering a simple yes or no felt as hard as cracking open a locked safe. His mother took him to see specialists. She said that he would speak to her, but anyone else. They told him he was selectively mute. He tried to tell them that he wasn't, that couldn't be right. But the words wouldn't come out. So Midoriya took the title, at least hoping his peers would leave him alone now his shyness had a name. They didn't. You could get their autographs. Inko said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. Wouldn't that be nice? Midoriya grunted in reply and put down his chopsticks. But honey, you've hardly eaten anything. You need brain power. I'll be all right. Inko hesitated. Does that mean you feel prepared? That's wonderful to hear. And now, it's 7 o'clock, so a little early to go to bed quite yet. Why don't you play something? The neighbors said they can hear it if you leave the window open. They really like it. Honestly, if you sang along, it could help with your confidence a little. Maybe one day. Inko smiled as her son opened the window and picked up his guitar, tuning it slowly and fiddling with the fret. I'm proud of you, Izuku. You know that, right? He smiled at her. Thank you, Mum. She picked up her empty bowl and her son's worryingly full one, before beginning to walk towards the door as Izuku began to strum a tune. Tiny Dancer, Elton John. She left his door open to let the music flow through the apartment, a skip in her step and a smile creeping across her face as she threw away the remainder of the food and washed up the bowls. Inko began to hum the melody to the famous song. Music drifting through the air and giving the otherwise tedious task a new life and a new rhythm. It gave her such joy to hear her son pour his heart and soul into his music. He loved it more than he had ever loved anything. It gave him a purpose, something to enjoy. He'd wanted to be a hero all his life, but he was quirkless, and as much as Inko wanted to support him, to say you can be a hero, she just couldn't. Because it wasn't the truth. Izuku deserved nothing but the truth. The last 10 months had been hard for him. She didn't understand why, but all of a sudden, that stubborn light of hope that shone so lustrously from him was snuffed out. He stopped talking, focused only on his studies. Consequently, he was so bright that not even that school could put him down. But that brightness just didn't hold the same warmth as it once did. All Inko wanted was to see him happy again. He was so good at the guitar. He had to stop lessons when the teacher said there was nothing more he could possibly teach him, and Izuku refused to spend money on something that was no longer necessary. He had the same attitude for nearly every instrument he'd ever learnt. He knew the guitar, piano, drums, but no instrument that required his mouth to play. Inko wondered if it was because he wanted to sing, but he refused every time. The only class he continued to attend was dance. It had kept his fitness up. If it weren't for that, Inko was worried he'd waste away, locked up in his room forever. But the boy had always been drawn to such things. It was like music was a part of him. Not that she was surprised. It was her husband's influence, she supposed. With his quirk, fire breath, he could never sing without filling the house with smoke, but that never stopped him when they were younger. He had such a beautiful voice. He told her she wasn't so bad herself. That always made her smile. Inko wondered if Izuku had inherited it. She longed to hear him sing so much, to see if he had. Inko opened the other windows across the apartment, letting the sound free from its cage to sing to the rest of the world. Even if Izuku wouldn't open his mouth to do the same, his music still brought others joy. It held a certain magic in it. Tiny Dancer. He'd danced to this song once before. It had brought her to tears. Hisashi always said she was such a crier. Inko leant on the windowsill and gazed out at the rest of the world. There were drunks, hobbling home, arm in arm, down on the street. As she opened her mouth to sing the chorus, more tears pricked at her eyes when those drunken souls began to kick at the puddles in the rain and sing along too. Hold me closer, tiny dancer. If only Izuku had the bravery to sing along. His voice could change the world. Inko was sure of it. A canary couldn't save any lives if it refused to sing. The fact that Midoriya wasn't to try for UA's hero course seemed to satisfy Kaken. He certainly wasn't happy that Midoriya would be trying for any course at all in his dream school, but general studies would have to do. It's not like the two would often cross paths anyway, let alone speak to each other. Midoriya eventually concluded that his mother knew about his poor relationship with Kaken. Whether she had ever spoken with Mrs. Bakugo about the matter was another story. Nonetheless, she didn't make him travel to the UA grounds alongside his old friend. That, unfortunately, didn't save the two from meeting at the gates. Kaken glared at him. "Stay out of my way, Deku," he hissed. Midoriya didn't say anything at all. He stepped back frantically and let Kaken waltz in ahead of him. A few of the other people around him glanced curiously as he stood, head down, just outside the gates. Once Kaken was out of sight, Midoriya shook his head and stepped inside the school. "I need to get a grip. I'm not going to be in his class anymore, so there's no need to worry. Yeah, maybe words won't get stuck in my throat anymore and he wasn't looking where he was going. He tripped up on a loose tile, about to fall face first onto the ground and make an absolute fool of himself in front of everyone. But then suddenly the ground stopped growing closer to his face. No, he stopped in midair. "Are you okay?" Someone laughed. Midoriya almost yelped in surprise at the pink-cheeked girl beside him. "I stopped you with my quirk. I would have asked first, but I figured you wouldn't mind me helping." He just stared at her. She didn't seem to notice, only propping him upright, deactivating her quirk and waving goodbye, before skipping off towards the Hero Course entrance examinations. The Hero Course. A different world to his own. Midoriya shook the brief thoughts of friendship and panics over actually interacting with a girl, to refocus on the upcoming exams. They would determine his future, after all, Hero Course or not. There were two parts to UA's Hero Course entrance exam, a practical and a theoretical. However, for general studies, the soon-to-be students were instead given two papers, one far more challenging than the other. It was clear, as Midoriya's pen scribbled across the exam, that whoever set these questions did not intend for all the necessary knowledge to be in place. Some were far too advanced and complicated for your average middle school graduate to complete to their fullest extent. However, Midoriya was not your average middle school graduate. Question 18. Explain how quirklessness is inherited and how this can be identified by specialists. It was practically made for him. To have the last question revolving around quirklessness was to be expected, of course. This was the first year that UA had allowed quirkless people to enter any of their courses. That included the Hero Course, but as many had said before, it was time Midoriya got his head out of the clouds and strived for a dream that was more attainable. Midoriya's mind raced as he batted the top of his pen against his lip. There are 11 marks available for this question. It's clear they want us to use medical terms and clearly describe the link between the lack of a quirk and an extra joint in your little toe, he thought, before beginning to write. Quirklessness is a hereditary condition caused by two recessive alleles. This means both the mother and father must have been a carrier of quirklessness, or be quirkless themselves, in order to have a quirkless child, despite having quirks themselves. This is because the gene that allows the expression of a quirk is dominant, meaning if only one dominant allele is present, it will mask the effect of a recessive allele and produce a quirk. The probability of having a quirkless child if both parents are carriers is 25%. This probability isn't fixed because freak mutations can occur, resulting in quirks entirely different to the child's parents in rare situations. Carriers of quirklessness are increasingly rare, meaning the percentage of the population which are quirkless is less than 5%. However, a majority of this number are rather elderly, and the proportion of quirkless people who are of my generation is only around 20%. This means the percentage of people who are of my age and quirkless is only 1%. Quirklessness can be difficult to diagnose as some quirks can be invisible and difficult to identify at a young age. However, for quirk doctors, this can be a little easier. Autosomal linkage is where two genes are positioned very close to each other on the same chromosome, close to each other in DNA, and are therefore frequently inherited together. The recessive alleles of quirklessness are inherited alongside an extra joint in the subject's little toes. A quirk doctor need only take an X-ray to see if this joint is present in order to diagnose quirklessness. The chance of having the extra joint and having a quirk is rarer than quirklessness itself, if you don't take into account any situations where the quirk results in extra bones or joints being present. In genetic inheritance, chromosomes can cross over and exchange pieces of DNA during meiosis. However, the recombinant frequency of quirklessness and having an extra joint is so low, because the alleles are so close together, that the inheritance of either gene separately is near to unheard of. Have you come across anyone particularly interesting in the entrance exams this year, All Might? Questioned Principal Nedzu. The skeletal man sighed. Unfortunately, no. There were a few who received a good number of rescue points, but no one who made a particularly grand impression. A shame really. But perhaps Sir Naitai's suggestion will do you well. I hope so. I have faith in young Mirio, he seems a promising candidate. But I fear that he'll refuse the quirk. The two were sitting in the principal's office. Yagi gazed at the results board for the first-year hero course exams whilst Nedzu happily finished marking the theoretical papers for general and business studies. It is a possibility. He has done so well with his own abilities recently and could wish for another, less fortunate soul to take up your mantle. Yeah. What about you, Principal Nedzu? Anyone you find interesting this year? Why yes, I most certainly did. Yagi blinked in surprise. You did? From the hero course? No, he smiled. Quite the opposite. For you see, I put some particularly difficult questions in the general studies examinations this year, but one student has breezed through it all with no apparent difficulty. You should read his brief essay on the inheritance of quirklessness, quite stunning. I would expect such an answer from a graduate of UA, not simply a future student. Quirklessness. Yagi frowned, accepting the paper from the principal. He scanned through the answer, neat handwriting and outstanding knowledge for someone of his age. Yes, but I would expect he's done quite a bit of research into the matter, considering he's quirkless himself. All Might almost dropped the paper in surprise. Quirkless? In his generation? If you read his report you'll find that only 1% of our population fit those parameters, the principal chuckled. To think we could have missed out on such a bright young man if we continued to not accept quirkless people. I'm almost ashamed of whoever set the rule to begin with. However, it would have been necessary back along, when quirklessness was more common. All Might closed the paper and flipped to the front. He had a very high mark, only dropping a few here and there. Izuku Midoriya? Where had he heard that name before? Midoriya's weekly schedule had been a busy one. Although, as he mastered instruments and dropped their lessons, he found himself with more and more free time. That was why, on a Thursday evening, he was wandering down the coastline, guitar bag in hand, looking for somewhere quiet and desolate to play. He used to learn piano on a Thursday. It was guitar on Tuesdays, violin on a Wednesday. Mondays were always free, and so were Fridays. On Friday, his father called in from the United States. He would talk to his wife for a while before Izuku arrived and he would tell him about his week. Izuku never had much to say. He'd tell him about his music and revising for the entrance exams, but nothing more. Saturdays and Sundays were reserved for dance classes. The thing is with dance, is Midoriya could never really get enough of it. It was awfully scary at first, but he soon realized that everyone else there was as frightened as he was to mess up or look like a fool. They learned routines, sometimes together, sometimes alone, never a master of one but decent at everything they tried. It was fun. But God forbid anyone outside the club ever learning of Midoriya's pastimes. Kakin knew about the drum lessons, but that was only because they'd bumped into each other there, and silently agreed never to speak of it again, not that it was too difficult for Midoriya. Dagoba Beach, what a tip. The only ones around here to listen to Midoriya's music were the seagulls, and he was more than happy for it. Perhaps he should do something about all this rubbish. Midoriya supposed this stretch of coastline could have been beautiful without all the trash. He wandered down onto the sand. Being careful where he trod, Midoriya made his way to the front of the piles of rubbish, so he could look out at the sun setting over the ocean. Precariously, the boy clambered to the top of one of the towering peaks of junk and sat down on top of what appeared to be an old microwave. He balanced his guitar case under his feet and checked to see if the instrument was in tune. He sat there for hours, strumming along to whatever tune surfaced in his mind, watching the waves lap at the shore. Eventually, when the light of day was all but gone, he packed up his things and started to wander home. He didn't see the familiar, gaunt man, sitting on the bench not far away, humming along to those same tunes as he watched Midoriya's silhouette, contrasted against the orange of the sunset. Yagi smiled. Izuku Midoriya, huh? He was one to watch, that was for sure. Izuku! Izuku! Midoriya frantically tossed off his shoes and ran inside, worried about what his mum might be calling him for at such a time. He replied, dropping his guitar in the kitchen. Ah, Izuku, she exclaimed, hurrying into view. Your letter, from you, it's here. But it's only been a few days, he thought with a worried frown. He couldn't quite tell if that was good news or bad news. Midoriya accepted the letter and sat down on the sofa. His mother joined him, faltering as she asked if it was okay to see Yue's response at the same time as him. He didn't protest, but his hands were shaking as he opened the envelope. The letter fell out into his lap, the bold, golden logo of Yue staring at him from the back of the message. Slowly but surely, he turned over the paper and learned the nature of his fate. Dear Izuku Midoriya, congratulations! It is with great pleasure that we at UA offer you a place in General Studies Class 1C for the following academic year. Izuku! Inko cried, you got in. I'm so proud of you. Midoriya merely grinned, his eyes never leaving the paper, transfixed on those first few words. It was only after much squealing with delight from his mother that Midoriya was finally able to read the remainder of his letter. She hurried off to bring him a celebratory dinner, which he was certain she would have given to him despite the result. It spoke about the many opportunities that UA offered General Studies course students, the close interactions with pro-hero teachers and opportunities beyond graduating there. But after that, it was clear that the acceptance letter was more personalized than Midoriya thought it would have been. Midoriya, you were the highest-ranking student in theoretical papers across all first-year examinations, with a staggering 91%, even against particularly challenging questions that even third years at UA would struggle to answer at the level of detail that you portrayed. We did not expect many of our candidates to exceed a mark of 80%, particularly when scoring points in tricky questions in the second paper. Most impressive was your answer to the questions surrounding the inheritance of quirklessness, portraying a scientific knowledge far beyond what is expected of someone your age. It was only when we checked your background that the reasons behind this became clear. Midoriya gulped as he read on, fearing the worst, perhaps them saying that he needed to prove he was more than his quirklessness if he hoped to succeed at UA. You will be the very first quirkless student attending UA, should you accept our offer. But let us promise you that we will not let you down, nor permit any bigotry towards your condition or your selective muteness, as stated in your medical records. If you have any questions or queries surrounding this, please do not hesitate to contact me. Yours sincerely, Principal Nedzu. Midoriya hadn't noticed his mum leaning over his shoulder, reading the words as he did. This all sounds very positive, don't you think, Izuku? She said cheerfully, pushing a bowl of katsudon towards him. He hesitated before putting the letter down and turning to his food. He smiled. I guess it is. And his mother smiled wider. But neither of them could have guessed what his start at UA would lead to. Midoriya took a deep breath and stepped onto the grounds of UA. He just couldn't believe he was here. At UA, the greatest hero school in all of Japan. He is not here to become a hero. He is here to learn and maybe become a paramedic. Maybe. But he might have to get over the whole muteness thing first. But he wasn't mute, really. He keeps telling himself this, but the denial thing is starting to wear thin. At first, it was the truth. The only reason he wasn't talking was because it was just so much easier to just not say anything, rather than say the wrong thing. But then, it became harder and harder to get words from his brain to his mouth, and there are always so many things he wants to say, building up like water behind a dam. But that dam was getting near to impenetrable. Midoriya just hoped that one day it would burst, and when it did, it wouldn't be too dramatic and would be for all the right reasons. That's not too much to ask, right? Right. Anyway, kid. Clutching tightly onto the yellow straps of his backpack, Midoriya hurried towards the school. There were so many people there. They were all so excited, talking loudly to friends, new and old, wondering what this new year would bring. Class 1C, where are you? Wow, that's a big door. Are all the homerooms like this? They have to be. They wouldn't do something like this for a general studies class and not for a hero class. I wonder what Kaken's class will be like. Midoriya pondered. He let the door slide open and hurried inside, trying not to make eye contact with any of his new classmates. He didn't want to get off to a bad start. Just stay quiet, keep your head down, and everything's going to be okay. Midoriya found his name tag sitting on a desk near the window. It had a clip on the back of it. He glanced around to see some of the others were wearing theirs, so their name was displayed, loud and clear, to anyone who wanted to know it. Midoriya supposed he should do the same. Yeah, I was so sure I'd flunked it. I was kind of surprised when I got my acceptance letter after freaking out about it all so much. He looked up at the conversation occurring across the room. Most of his other classmates were standing together, discussing the exams they'd taken to get in. What was that one on hero laws? Like, I get this is a hero school primarily, but come on, like we were supposed to know all that junk. This is general studies. Not how to be a hero 101, or whatever, complained a grumpy-looking girl with straight blonde hair, fiddling with her name badge, Sumai Ochi. That one was okay. I was more stumped on the thing about quirklessness, said the girl next to her. She had cat ears. I didn't even know people could still be quirkless, added another. Hey, bored-looking guy. What did you think of the exam? Questioned the first. Suddenly everyone was looking at Midoriya. Oh my god. I'm going to have to speak. What if they ask if I'm quirkless? What if? It was alright, I guess. Midoriya let out a sigh of relief. They were talking to the guy sitting behind him, with heavy eye bags and a head of purple hair. Then they turned to Midoriya. What about you? Fortunately enough, no reply was necessary, because seconds later, the door was thrown open, cutting into their conversation spectacularly. Good morning, little listeners. It was Present Mike. Midoriya thought he'd be able to not fanboy over every single one of his teachers, but it's Present Mike. His homeroom teacher was Present Mike. Midoriya listened to his radio show every day of the week. It didn't seem like the rest of his class were as enthusiastic as Midoriya was. Then again, Midoriya didn't exactly make that much of a fuss out loud, as they got to their respective seats in not much of a hurry. Welcome to UA's General Study course, the voice hero exclaimed. I'm your homeroom teacher, Present Mike. You might have heard my radio show, and if you haven't you should totally go check it out. Midoriya saw Ochi roll her eyes from across the classroom. She certainly wasn't much of a hero fan. But anyway, before we begin orientation, it's time to take our very first roll call. Are you ready? No one replied. By the end of the year you will be replying to that, he insisted. His new class didn't seem very convinced. Midoriya certainly wasn't. When he started to call out names, Midoriya began to panic again. But the register ran much faster than he expected, and he didn't even have time to let his brain work into overdrive before his name was called out. Izuku Midoriya. Present Mike announced like he just won a prize. Midoriya did nothing but shakily raise his hand. Ah yes, said Present Mike. You know Giselle Midoriya? He nodded frantically. He had learnt Japanese sign language with his mother. She said that, if talking ever got too difficult, he could at least resort to a nonverbal communication. He'd been reluctant, but eventually complied. Midoriya had always had a knack for learning things like that. Words, dates, facts and figures, they all neatly organized themselves in his head, even if they didn't often come out. Are you okay with me telling everyone that you're mute? Present Mike signed at a remarkable speed with over-exaggerated hand gestures. Midoriya hesitated, but supposed he had no choice other than to nod. His brain-to-mouth communication just didn't seem to be working today. Okay, everybody, just to give you a heads up, Midoriya here is selectively mute, so he's basically the opposite of me. There's no pressure to speak around here, Midoriya. Just come to me if you have any questions, 'cause I know Japanese and American Sign Language. Unsteadily, Midoriya managed to sign in reply, I know ASL too. Wait, are you fluent in English? Midoriya flinched, although he supposed that wasn't too big of a jump to make. He nodded. Of course, his father had often spoken English to him at a young age. It had been over the phone, as he was rarely able to meet his family face to face, but the regular video calls had been enough to ingrain the language in Midoriya's brain. Present Mike pointed at Midoriya dramatically. New favorite student. You lot better catch up quick. Midoriya blushed furiously and sunk into his chair. Okay. Moving swiftly forwards. Can we get a yeah from Hitoshi Shinso? The guy with purple hair behind Midoriya glared at the teacher menacingly. He caved after about a second. Yeah? Awesome. How about a more enthusiastic one from Maki Matsumoto? Yeah. Close enough. There was a silent agreement across the classroom. This was the start of 3 long years. And how right they were, for all the wrong reasons. All right, listeners. We're 5 minutes late for orientation, so follow me. Midoriya would have made sure everyone else left before him, but Shinso seemed to have exactly the same ideas and Midoriya didn't want to get on the wrong side anyone, and this Shinso was certainly near the top of his list. His silence and hard glare just seemed to scream stay away from me, or else. The first years were ushered to an assembly point just outside the school's main building. Midoriya was quick to notice that they were positioned in order of class, from 1H all the way up to 1... Wait, no, 1B. Class 1A was nowhere to be seen. It must have been Bakugo's class, considering Midoriya couldn't spot his head of spiky blonde hair anywhere amongst the other heroics class, 1B. Greetings to you all, proclaimed Principal Nedzu. Midoriya watched the creature's beady eyes drift over the new student body as he spoke. The speech was long and tedious, revolving mainly around the promise within them and what good they could do for the world. Midoriya thought back to his acceptance letter. He had kept it, pinned it up on the wall next to his All Might poster. He hadn't said a word about his quirklessness being a disadvantage. In fact, the principal had held his condition at equal importance to his muteness. Midoriya didn't know what it meant to him quite yet, or perhaps what it would mean for his future at UA, but despite what he'd heard about Nedzu, despite all the comments of how frightening he was, Midoriya couldn't help but look up at him with more trust than he'd placed in any other teacher he'd made an acquaintance with. He could have sworn the principal's eyes lingered on Midoriya's green ones for a moment. They had never met face to face, but surely he could have found a picture of him somewhere. The quirkless, mute student with the highest marks across the year. Yeah, that wouldn't be at all surprising. After the assembly was over, the departments were taken around the school separately for a brief tour. Of course, general studies didn't need to know where any of the specialized heroics rooms were, nor the support classes. They were shown the cafeteria, where Recovery Girl's office was, where the changing rooms and gym were. Finally, when Class 1D separated from 1C, Present Mike led them back to their homeroom, where Midoriya was reunited with his precious bag, which he had been thinking about this entire time. Of course, UA wasn't like his old school. He knew he wouldn't return to find it reduced to a mere pile of ash, but no one would blame him for being cautious. So, we have reached our intermission, a lunch time. Present Mike announced, I know, we spent the entire morning listening to Nedzu, and trust me, it never gets old. His smile was rather fixed at this point. You lot know your way down to the lunch hall now, so you can head off whenever you want. In the meantime, I have to go and listen to Nedzu again in our annual first day staff meeting and find out if I won my bet. There's no way Eraserhead hasn't expelled anyone yet, and I'm gonna be the first to find out if he has. See you later, little listeners. And with that, he was gone. Instantly, chatter amongst his new classmates broke out around him. Midoriya had much preferred the silence. Okay, so I was talking to the people in Class 1D, and I couldn't find whoever had that 91%, Midoriya heard Ochi tell her new friends. He frowned at the revelation. 91%? Were they talking about the entrance exams still? Who managed to get 91%? Wait, that's me. So, whoever it is must be in our class, concluded a boy with darker skin and spiky brown hair. His name tag read Goro Tachibana. Midoriya got up quickly. There was no way he was going to waltz up to them and say, Yep, that's me. Because, number one, he'd have to actually say that and he was almost positive none of them knew sign language. And number two, he'd really prefer to avoid the attention at this point. Or at any point in the near future. He scurried out of the classroom as quickly as he could, taking his bag with him, only to walk right into purple-haired Shinso, who seemed to have the same idea when it came to prompt evacuation from any and all social situations. Sorry, Midoriya quickly signed, fully aware that he wouldn't understand. He hoped that at least he'd register the hand movements as an obvious attempt at an apology. Don't worry about it. Midoriya stared at him. Shinso could sign? He'd spoken the words as he signed them, so logically he had no problem with speaking or hearing. Midoriya didn't know what to think. There were about a dozen different questions he wanted to ask. Well, sign. But before he could attempt any of them, Shinso walked away, not giving him a second glance. Midoriya's mind raced. Shinso clearly wanted him to know that he understood sign, or else he wouldn't have bothered speaking and signing his response. He hadn't been cruel in any way, and was clearly as averse to social interaction as Midoriya was. Or at least he was on the first day of school. You coming? Shinso called back. He hadn't stopped or turned around to meet Midoriya's gaze, but it was clear that he was still speaking to him. He's speaking to me, thought Midoriya. It took a moment, but, just before he disappeared around the corner, Midoriya grasped tightly onto the strap of his backpack like it was the only thing tethering him to the earth and ran after his classmate. Midoriya stayed behind him as they walked to the cafeteria. Not a word was uttered between them, sign or otherwise, as they lined up for food. It was only when they reached the front of the line that Shinso spoke again. What are you going to eat? He asked, turning to Midoriya to see his reply. He hesitated, glancing at the menu in panic. He had been so busy thinking about all the possible reasons for Shinso wanting to interact with him that he'd completely forgotten that he was lining up for lunch, which he would have to order out loud. I'm not particularly hungry, he signed. Midoriya's hand movements were so jerky that it could really only be translated as a stutter. Maybe just as some of the rice? They reached the front of the queue. Can we have 2 bowls of the rice? Shinso asked lunch rush. He indicated at Midoriya in a way of letting him know that he was ordering for the 2 of them. Midoriya was so stunned that Shinso was actually helping him, that he didn't even freak out over the pro-hero lunch rush or acknowledge their brief conversation about white rice being a wonderful comfort food. Shinso didn't even look at Midoriya again until they had accepted their food and paid, when he was double-checking that Midoriya was still, well, alive, and that he was following him to a small table as far away from everyone else as he could find. Thank you, Midoriya told Shinso as soon as he had put down his tray on the table. Shinso just shrugged, sat down, and started to eat. Midoriya followed suit. The 2 ate in silence for a while, before Midoriya couldn't take it any longer. He tapped his chopsticks on the side of his bowl to get Shinso's attention, which took a couple of attempts. Where did you learn sign language? He could have asked how or when or, more usefully, why, but for some reason it came out as where. From the internet, he replied simply. Sometimes, it's easier to just not speak. Midoriya stared at him again. He'd been doing that a lot over the short time that they'd known each other. I was never mute, Shinso added after a moment's thought. It never got that far. But I thought sign language would be useful. Lets people know that I won't do anything to them. Midoriya frowned, his confusion clearly displayed across his face. It's my quirk, he continued. It's a villain's power. No quirk is a villain's quirk unless the holder is, themselves, a villain, Midoriya insisted. Shinso scoffed, it's brainwashing, he signed. I ask a question, out loud. If someone replies, then I have complete control over them. Midoriya blinked at him, but that's an amazing quirk. I'd love to have a power like that. You could so easily become a great hero with it. You really think so? Midoriya nodded frantically, before taking another mouthful of rice. It was awfully difficult to eat in sign. He would have gone on a tangent about all the good he could do with it if he had a few more hands. But his mother had often said that his muttering didn't translate well into sign. He always went too fast for anyone to understand. Well then you'd be the first, Shinso smiled. I'd love to have a quirk like that, Midoriya insisted. I would have gone straight to the hero course if I could. I failed the entrance exam, Shinso told him blankly. They used robots. Mind control doesn't work on robots. That's rather unfair. Yeah. Wait, didn't you take it too? You said you would have gone to the hero course if you could. Midoriya hesitated. He wasn't planning on letting anyone know. But Shinso had been so kind to him. Then again, it made him even more afraid that he'd turn away. Quirkless. It was Shinso's turn to stare now. He stayed like that for a couple of minutes as Midoriya's cheeks flushed red and his brain filled his head with fog made of doubts and the unmistakable fear of abandonment. You're the guy with 91%, aren't you? And now Midoriya was staring again. How did you? I bet you aced that question on quirklessness, Shinso grinned as he finished his rice. I would say it's unfair. Then again, no one would be complaining if it was an essay on some kind of disease that I happened to have once and therefore knew more about it. He wasn't even referring to quirklessness as a disease. He even confirmed that seconds later. I didn't think you were, Midoriya insisted. Are you going to keep everyone in the dark about you being the local genius? Shinso smirked. I'm not a genius. Sure, you're not, mister. I'm fluent in English and JSL and ASL, got the highest score in the theoretical tests across all departments and is already a teacher's favorite student, Midoriya. And now Midoriya was blushing again, a profound realization washing over him. He had a friend. Shinso didn't know what he had been expecting from UA's General Studies course. All he could think of when he entered Class 1C for the first time was that he just needed to last until the sports festival. That was where he could make his mark, where he could show the world, or, more specifically, UA's principal, Nedzu, that he deserved a place in the heroics course. He just had to plow forwards, focus on his studies, and everything would be okay. He had no plans on making friends. That would be a consequence on not planning on remaining in Class 1C for long enough to make friends. Even then, no intention crossed his mind of making more than an acquaintance with any possible classmates from the hero course. He had more pressing matters to attend to, that being, focusing on achieving his dream of becoming a hero. He'll show the world that he wasn't a villain, far from it. But then that shy, bushy-haired boy, the one sat in front of Shinso, caught his attention. He'd never met anyone else who found speaking more than a trivial part of everyday life, who understood its value and its consequences. Of course, there was bound to be a different reason behind this Midoriya's selective muteness than any issues Shinso had faced. But then he found out he was quirkless. He had no plans on making friends, really. Shinso just wanted to help him. The thing is with someone who had struggles speaking, is it often comes down to the people around them. He was curious, he wouldn't deny it. But being quirkless? That made a lot of sense. Suddenly, Shinso had found someone who he could really relate to, and not just on the problems with speaking front. It was an easy conclusion to make. Midoriya had been bullied at his old school, or possibly schools, for his quirklessness, and, subsequently, developed some serious problems because of it. He had no plans on making friends, but maybe Midoriya hadn't either. And that's something else they had in common. And, well, Midoriya hadn't shown the slightest ounce of fear confronted with Shinso's quirk. That might have been because Midoriya didn't speak and therefore wasn't easily mind-controlled. He was the first person he'd ever met who learnt about his quirk and didn't immediately link it with that of a villain. In fact, he said he could be a hero. And for just saying that, Midoriya was Shinso's hero. Did you hear? Shinso looked up from his phone. It was Kisho Shimizu. He had a twin in class, Kana, so the two both awkwardly insisted they call them by their first names. A guy from the heroics course has already been expelled, Kisho finished, eyes wide. Well, Shinso assumed they were. He had a hideous bowl cut, with a fringe so long that it covered his eyes. Shinso felt his heart skip a beat. If someone had already been expelled, then there was a place open in the hero course. Midoriya tapped him on the shoulder from behind. Shinso turned only to see his friend's sign. Present Mike won his bet. Shinso smirked. Yeah, I guess he did. The person who was expelled must have been from Eraserhead's class. I've heard of him, he's so cool. His quirk erases other people's quirks by looking at them, so he effectively fights quirkless. That does sound kind of cool. How come I've never heard of him before? He's an underground hero, they tend to avoid the press. Sounds like the kind of hero I would want to be, Shinso thought. Yeah, he could see himself in Eraserhead's class. Hey, what are you two talking about? Interjected Matsumoto. He sat behind Shinso in class and was one of the few who still insisted on wearing those stupid name tags. None of your business, was what Shinso was going to say. Oh, hi, Midoriya, right? Interjected Kaneko, the girl with the cat ears, before Shinso could say those words. Can you tell him I say hi? She asked Shinso. He's mute, not deaf, Shinso retorted spitefully. Oh, sorry, she exclaimed. Is there something wrong with your voice or what? Midoriya looked like he was absolutely ready to roll onto the floor and die. Shinso was totally there with him. Rude much, Kaneko? Snapped Ochi. That girl was hardly ever in a good mood. Sorry, the cat girl replied. She sounded somehow offended. Come on, Midoriya, let's go to lunch, Shinso insisted, already getting up and heading towards the door. Sorry about her, Ochi told Midoriya as he hurried after Shinso. I've only known her for a couple of days and I can already tell that she's too curious for her own good. Midoriya just nodded frantically and then almost ran out of the door behind Shinso. They didn't say anything, almost per tradition, as they walked down to the cafeteria. Shinso ordered for Midoriya, who had the same thing as he did, and they even sat down on the same table. Shinso could tell this would be exactly what they'd be doing for the next. Who knows how long? I wonder what that guy did to get expelled, Shinso pondered as Midoriya picked at his food. He didn't seem in the mood for talking, not even in sign. Shinso tapped his chopsticks on the side of his bowl, something he'd noticed that Midoriya did to get his attention. It seemed to work both ways, because Midoriya looked up almost immediately. Are you okay? Shinso signed. Midoriya just sighed and shrugged. I know why you don't like talking. His eyes widened, clearly worried about what Shinso might have concluded. It's because of your quirklessness, isn't it? Midoriya's body slumped, his body language confirming Shinso's assumption. When I was in middle school, he continued, staring down at his untouched food. I had similar problems because of my quirk. Shinso didn't wait for a response from Midoriya. People just, as soon as they learnt about it, they would stop talking to me because they were worried I'd take control. They wrote me off as a villain before even getting to know me. When people don't talk to you, it becomes that little bit harder to talk to them. Midoriya tapped the side of his bowl. Shinso looked up to see him sign. It's not that they didn't talk to me. I stopped talking because I hoped they would stop talking to me, stop noticing me altogether. They didn't. But then it became too hard to talk anyway, Shinso finished for him. Midoriya nodded bleakly. The two sat in silence for a moment, both staring into space, thinking about everything, yet nothing at all. I know what could cheer you up, Shinso said, making Midoriya jump. What? Making up sign names for our classmates. Please read the endnotes concerning this point. Midoriya grinned. In sign language, specifically ASL, names had to be finger-spelled unless they had a direct meaning, like hope or grace or something like that. So, instead of spelling out long names, people would come up with nicknames that had simple signs. It was easier in JSL because the kanji could just be used, but that took the fun out of it. Okay, so, forget Kaneko, her name literally means cat, so there's no point Midoriya started. No, interrupted Shinso. Everyone's getting sign names. Forget kanji and proper meanings. Midoriya laughed. Actually laughed, it took Shinso by surprise. It was the first sound other than the occasional surprised squeal that he'd ever heard Midoriya make. Let's call Kaneko. Curious Midoriya decided. Tamer than I would have chosen, but let's go with it, replied Shinso. What about Ochi? Grump? Definitely. No one else here knows sign language, right? They would have said something. But, honestly, I'm not great with names. I hardly remember anyone. How about the twins, Kisho and Kana? Kana's the one with the glasses, right? We're calling her Glasses, aren't we? Midoriya shrugged, still smiling broadly. And her brother can be Fringe. He laughed again. Fringe? Have you seen his hair? Terrible. What about the person who sits behind you in class? Matsumoto, Shinso told him, he can be Donkey. The laughter returned. What? Don't you think he looks a bit like Donkey Kong? They carried on like this for the rest of lunch, both barely eating anything, but neither of them seemed to mind. It had been a long time since Shinso really had this much fun with a friend, and it wasn't hard to conclude that. Midoriya thought the same way. What they were doing wasn't particularly interesting, it was just normal. Something that perhaps normal friends would get up to, laughing over stupid little things and making inside jokes that no one else would understand. But it wasn't normal for the two of them. They had never really had the chance to do something like this before. As lunchtime came to an end and the two of them tidied away their trays and remaining food, Shinso could still see that beaming smile across Midoriya's face. Thoughts of rude questions and intrusive classmates left behind them. Unfortunately, that euphoria couldn't last forever. That afternoon, Class 1C joined up with 1D for a joint sports lesson. Present Mike and whoever the homeroom teacher for 1D was, Shinso didn't pay attention enough to care, had decided that they should do a team-building exercise so they could all get to know each other a little more, and that was why they were ushered into one of the school's massive gyms, or just huge halls that the newbie heroes would fight in, to play Team C versus Team D dodgeball. The rules are simple. Present Mike cried over the way too excited crowd of general studies students. Get hit anywhere on the body and you're out. Unless it's the head, because that's cruel. If you catch a ball, someone of your choice can rejoin the game. Oh, and no crossing the line onto the other team's side. We're starting with your backs against the wall, run to the middle, grab your ammo and... What about quirks? Called out Kaneko. For this first round we'll say yes to quirks. As long as it's not going to seriously hurt anyone, we'll see how it goes and ban quirks next round if it all goes wrong. But you have 10 minutes or so to talk as a team and then we'll begin. Okay, guys, started Ochi, who was clearly aiming for the class representative position they would be choosing in a few days' time. Let's talk quirks. Anyone got anything useful for this? Shinso could feel Midoriya freaking out beside him. Shinso wasn't faring so well either. He hadn't told anyone about his quirk. He didn't want to make a bad impression, but did it really matter? He had Midoriya, and it was clear he wasn't about to be driven away. My quirk's absolutely useless, laughed Goro Tachibana. All I can do is turn things orange for, like, a day. A day? Repeated someone else. Oh yeah, once at my old school, my friends dared me to turn the whiteboard orange, and then the ink in our teachers' pens, so nothing would show up. I know it sounds kind of lame, but it was really funny at the time. Can he turn himself orange? Midoriya wondered. He often used sign language as he thought. He would mouth words too, occasionally. Midoriya asks if you can turn yourself orange, Shinso told him. Midoriya instantly blushed, clearly not expecting Shinso to repeat his thoughts. If I want. I have more control over that. I can turn it on or off whenever I please, Tachibana explained. Then why doesn't he turn our side of the pitch orange and then himself so he blends in? Shinso repeated he plan out loud. The class was more than impressed. They ended up going around the class, talking about quirks and asking Midoriya to come up with strategies around them. He made rather mundane quirks into a serious advantage. Shinso was shocked, but then he remembered. Midoriya was the one with 91% in the exam. He really was a genius. Both Shinso and Midoriya were very relieved, however, when the other team complained that they were taking too long to strategize, and the teachers announced that the game had to start or they'd never have sufficient time to play enough rounds. 3, 2, begin. Present Mike cried, and both teams charged towards the middle of the pitch. Midoriya wasn't so keen, and hung back whilst the rest of them dove right in. Shinso did begin like the rest of them, but quickly hurried back to Midoriya as Tachibana turned the ground orange. Are you all right? He questioned, picking up a spare ball that had rolled towards him. Midoriya nodded, and then squealed rather loudly as he dodged a flying ball, which he seemed to register more as a missile rather than a softball. Sure. Shinso insisted. He nodded again, dodging another projectile. The other team considered them good targets, considering they were standing still and hanging back. Midoriya, however, seemed to be exceptional at dodging. Shinso wasn't sure if this was a good or bad thing. He also wasn't sure what to think about how muscular his friend seemed. He looked so small and weak in his uniform, but his UA regulation PE kit showed otherwise, and Midoriya didn't seem like the kind to work out for fun or go for runs or something. Team C won the first round of dodgeball and the second. Shinso got hit in the head twice, but neither him nor Midoriya were hit out. The third round was more interesting. Team D quickly realized Tachibana's orange tactic and got him out as soon as possible. Kana and Kisho, who both had weak water manipulation quirks, were banned from using them after the opposing team had a heated argument against them and Ochi about pouring water on the ball so they could make their throws more accurate. Ochi was hit out moments later, quickly followed by the twins, who now shouted very loudly at their remaining classmates. Shinso stayed by Midoriya for most of the round. Midoriya had yet to throw a single ball and continued to dodge them expertly, whilst Shinso tried his hand at catching, mainly so he could let Ochi back in so she would stop shouting at them. In the end, Midoriya was the only one left, and as it turns out, throwing was not one of his strong points, and neither was catching. However, it was increasingly hilarious how worked up the last two members of Class 1D were getting. No matter how hard they tried, they could not hit Midoriya. It wasn't very helpful that one of them managed to catch one of Midoriya's throws, and they chose to let back in one of their team members, who must have had some kind of accuracy or levitation quirk, because the dodgeballs seemed to change direction mid-air to zoom towards Midoriya. On my mark, announced the Team D player with the accuracy quirk. His other two teammates stood, poised, next to him, dodgeballs in hand, ready to throw. 3, 2, now. Shinso winced as the three projectiles were aimed perfectly at Midoriya. He had no way to escape. Well, that's what everyone had thought, until Midoriya leapt at an exceptional height. Over the ball, did a front flip, and landed perfectly. Okay, now the fitness is even more questionable. What was that? It was Present Mike who yelled that. He'd been commentating the entire time. The other team players were so stunned that the next throw was poor enough for even Midoriya to catch it. And he catches it. Present Mike exclaimed. Donkey signed Midoriya to Shinso. They forgot Present Mike new sign. Both were very thankful that he masked his laughter with coughing when Shinso told Matsumoto to rejoin the team. It wasn't long after that the last three members of Class 1D were hit out by Matsumoto, so 1C reigned victorious and undefeated. That was amazing, Midoriya, exclaimed Kaneko as the class surrounded him after PE, when they'd all gotten changed and gathered in their homeroom class to collect their things at the end of the day. Who knew you were so, athletic? Your strategies were really good, Ochi admitted, better than anything I could come up with. Yeah, thanks for helping me with my quirk. Tachibana added, I'd never thought of using it for camouflage. Midoriya seemed rather overwhelmed, but he wasn't freaking out as much as usual. They showered him with praise, not asking too many questions so Shinso didn't have to act as the translator that many times. But before the clock quite reached the end of the day, the one question he had been so worried about was finally uttered. We never got to ask, said Ochi. What's your quirk, Midoriya? It's like intelligence or agility, isn't it? Supposed Kana. Midoriya looked to Shinso in fear. But Shinso never had to make that horrible decision to let his only friend out on his biggest secret. What are you all still doing here? Exclaimed Present Mike as he dramatically burst through the door. I'd have thought you lot would hurry off home as soon as humanly possible, he said, hurrying over to his desk to pick up a pile of paperwork. We were just talking, sir, explained Ochi. Present Mike's gaze rested on Midoriya. Yeah, you were pretty awesome today, favorite student, he said without shame. You don't need a quirk to do stuff like that, huh? Well, see you all tomorrow. He left as quickly as he had arrived, leaving a silence behind him. Shinso glanced back at Midoriya. He was shaking. Wait, you're not? Quirkless, are you? Someone guessed. Midoriya looked down at his bright red shoes in humiliation. Holy shoot, you're awesome, scoffed Watanabe, who sat next to Midoriya in class. Midoriya actually jumped in surprise, looking up at him. He was rather tall, with wide eyes. Yeah, Present Mix right, you don't need a quirk to do all that cool stuff. I've got a quirk, and I can't do half of what you do, added Tachibana. Midoriya's the one with 91% in the entrance exam, Shinso told them, resting a hand on Midoriya's shoulder. I knew it, sighed Ochi. I only got 73%. I bet you got all those marks in the quirklessness question, huh? And plenty of other stuff besides, Shinso insisted with a menacing stare. Yeah, whatever, she said with a wave of her hand. Anyway, see you all tomorrow. I'm going to miss my train if I'm late again. Not a single person uttered a word against Midoriya's quirklessness. Shinso's gaze scared off anyone who tried, specifically Kaneko. Midoriya didn't sign a word, but Shinso didn't need that to tell that he was grateful. They walked together out of school. Shinso could see a soft smile forming on Midoriya's face. Well, see you tomorrow, Shinso said as they were about to part ways. Don't worry about them knowing about your quirklessness. I promise they won't say anything untoward about it. Midoriya hesitated, before nodding. Satisfied, Shinso turned and to walk away. But, just before he could get any further, Midoriya reached out and grasped his shoulder. Shinso turned, confused. That was when, in the smallest voice imaginable, his mute friend opened his mouth and whispered, "Thank you," and nothing more, turning and walking down the street before Shinso even had the change to reply. Shinso was quiet as he walked home. He didn't say a word to his parents as he put down his stuff and shut himself in his room. He stood there, staring at the book on quirklessness he had left open on his bed from the night before. Midoriya was someone too afraid to speak to anyone. Shinso was someone that everyone was too afraid to speak to. But out of them all, the only one Midoriya would utter a word to was him. There are some souls who live their lives to a constant beat. Nothing they do is out of rhythm, and this isn't meant in the context of someone who is perfectly organized in everything they do, for that is near to impossible. Life simply cannot be ordered with such precision. Instead, this rhythm is irregular. It has its ups and downs, times where it's in a minor key and where it transitions to major. This beat can be to an invention of the mind, or it can be well known, perhaps a song or two, or 100, shuffled on a mental playlist to an order which is not as random as initially anticipated. Midoriya is one of these people. He had only been attending UA for a few days, but already there was a spring to his step and a song in his mind that he had not heard for far too long. Background music was what it was like. A soundtrack to his life, long since overdue. Now, everywhere he goes, songs creep up on him from the deepest depths of his mind, the tunes hanging just past his lips, tantalizingly close to spilling out into reality. Midoriya was considering putting in earplugs and listening to whatever song the radio decided upon as he approached UA's glistening halls. The gigantic building loomed up ahead of him. It wasn't as ominous as it once was, representing nothing but a dream forever out of reach. Now UA was a place where he could find a future. Maybe it wasn't going to be where he had wished it would take him, but did that really matter? Right now, Midoriya was just happy to have gone there at all. The main reason for this, in fact, had just ran around the corner. "Morning, Midoriya," Shinso exclaimed. Midoriya had never seen him so excited for the day ahead. No, he couldn't quite place it. Something about his whole demeanor seemed different. The bags under his eyes were lighter, was that it? His smile was that little bit brighter, more genuine, less of a smirk and more of an actual smile. Midoriya grinned back at him. "Good morning," he said, and suddenly slammed his hands over his mouth. The words had just fallen. Right out? He hadn't even thought about it, no impending panic attack about the very thought of releasing the smallest sentence. It was normal, like speaking was supposed to be. Shinso's smile grew wider. "Tea, that was an accident," added Midoriya, his hands fumbling over each other. He briefly wondered if his sign was even interpretable. "What? Speaking?" questioned Shinso, his signature smirk returning to his face as he began to walk up the hill towards school, Midoriya walking faster than he usually would to keep up with him. Midoriya hesitated. This was strange. It had been a long time since he was last able to talk so freely. Even talking to his mother could be a struggle sometimes. He would avoid it if he could. "Weiss," he managed before letting out a slight laugh. "A good accident, I hope, and not that you were trying to not talk to me." "No, not at all," Midoriya replied. Oh my god. I'm having a conversation? So, why are you talking all of a sudden? He asked hesitantly, as if he was worried the question would put Midoriya off talking altogether. Started Midoriya. He rubbed his throat, before glancing back at Shinso, who was still staring at him. Usually my throat gets all clogged up when I try to say something. So, nothing comes out. Well, honestly, it meant a lot to me when you spoke yesterday, Shinso admitted after a moment of silence. Midoriya blinked at him, the confusion etched on his expression. You must be crazy, he continued, to only want to speak to the person who can brainwash you if you do. I can deal with crazy, Midoriya replied. It was getting a little easier, the more he spoke. Good, Shinso laughed, because it's only going to get worse from here, I promise you that. I'll hold you to that promise. They walked in silence the rest of the way to school. Yeah, it was silent between them, but as they reached the front gates, it was clear the rest of the world had other plans. Is that the press? Shinso wondered aloud, voicing Midoriya's own thoughts. Hey, you're UA students. What's it like having All Might as a teacher? A reporter demanded, moving a microphone in the direction of Midoriya. And the clock's back. Back off, Shinso snarled. We're general studies students, we're not in the hero course. All Might doesn't teach us. They backed off pretty quickly after that. Shinso grabbed Midoriya's wrist and dragged him harshly through the crowd and finally into UA's grounds. I didn't know he teaches here. Midoriya signed as soon as they were free from the crowd. I heard mutter from some of the others about it, Shinso admitted. Are you a fan? You were? What happened? Midoriya fiddled with his fingers, unsure of what to say. As they walked through the halls towards Class 1C, he took a deep breath, tugged on Shinso's shoulder, and explained. I was attacked by a villain a while back. All Might saved me. Afterwards, I asked him if I could ever be a hero without a quirk. He said no, that it was good to have dreams, but that I had to ensure they were attainable. He said that. Shinso gaped. I wasn't a huge fan to begin with. I'm even less of one now. It doesn't matter, really. So, did you talk to him? He asked as they entered their homeroom. Yes. I suppose it's not so hard to speak to certain people. I don't think I'd be able to speak to him now though. And that was over 10 months ago. I found speaking easier back then. This whole muteness thing only really became a major problem afterwards. Shinso sat down in his desk. I'm glad things are starting to get better now, he signed. But you don't have to pressurize yourself to speak. I can keep translating for you at school if you want, and Cockatoo can too. Midoriya sniggered. Cockatoo? Present Mike, obviously, Shinso smirked. What's this about Present Mike? Questioned Ochi. She sat next to Shinso in class, so Midoriya couldn't blame her for overhearing. Inside joke, Shinso replied at the same time as signing. See, this is the problem with speaking out loud, eavesdroppers. Hey, Midoriya, Ochi continued, I learned some sign language after school yesterday. Is this right? And so she signed, hello, good morning, how are you? Depends on what you're trying to say, Shinso told her. If you were trying to say, hello, good morning, how are you, then yes. But if not, then no, that's obviously what I was trying to say, Ochi retorted in obvious irritation. Midoriya, unsure of what to do in this situation, just gave her a nervous thumbs up. It was luckily all he had time to do before Present Mike burst through the door, in a dramatic manner that was becoming routine at this point. Are you ready for roll call? He exclaimed. No one replied. Come on. Present Mike yelled. I want to hear a why. Still no answer. One day, he sighed and started with the register. Once he had finished, Present Mike didn't disappear off to the teacher's lounge as he usually did, and instead sat down in the chair behind his desk. So, you lot have been here for a few days now, and hopefully you've all gotten to know each other. That means it's time to choose. Drum roll please. No drum roll followed. A class representative. It was a surprise to no one when the long and tedious task of choosing a class president resulted in Ochi coming out on top. Midoriya and Shinso were more than glad when President Ochi was told to stop her never-ending speech so lessons could begin. I almost regret voting for her now, Shinso sighed as he walked beside Midoriya to lunch. I'm just glad I was allowed to opt out, Midoriya signed in reply. You could have been a great class representative, Shinso insisted. You're really smart and everyone likes you. You don't have to talk to take on all those responsibilities, Ochi was going on about. I think talking is expected. Sign language had many positives and negatives. First of all, it successfully allowed nervous, shy people like Midoriya to communicate without having to speak, and, because it wasn't commonly known, he and Shinso could have secret conversations whenever they pleased. Then again, having Shinso acting as his translator whenever their conversations weren't secret made him feel extremely guilty, although his friend insisted it wasn't a problem. Another downside was the fact that they had to be facing each other to talk, and both hands had to be free. That meant, when, for example, carrying trays, their conversations were cut short. Shinso's audible sigh moments after paying for his meal made Midoriya jump. Our usual table is filled up, he explained. We'll have to sit next to someone else. While holding his tray, Midoriya couldn't reply, so all he could do was nod and follow Shinso as he wandered around the hall. Midoriya couldn't help but relate the situation to a couple of sharks swimming through shallow waters. The thought made Midoriya chuckle softly under his breath. Mind if we sit here? Shinso said eventually, drawing Midoriya out of whatever dream world he'd entered. Not at all. It seems rather crowded at the moment, doesn't it? Replied the rather energetic boy Shinso had sat down next to. Midoriya could already see the annoyance in his eyes. So, anyway, Ida, you're going to make a great class representative, no need to worry about it. The girl Midoriya ended up sitting next to said, finishing whatever conversation she had been having. Oh hey, I know you. Midoriya flinched in surprise, turning to the girl. We met on the day of the entrance exam, right? She confirmed. He nodded frantically, pinning the familiarity of her face to the girl from his first few moments at who stopped him from falling with her quirk. I'm Uraraka and this is Ida. Nice to meet you both. What class are you in? Polite Ida immediately questioned. 1C, Shinso answered simply, digging into his food without a further glance at the two. We're in 1A, said Uraraka happily. What are your names again? Shinso and Midoriya, he replied, pointing to Midoriya as he said his name. His throat felt dry. It was strange how earlier that morning his voice had felt freer than it had ever been, but now, as soon as he was exposed to a more social situation, the wall separating his mind from his mouth was thrown up again, closing him off from the outside world. Has anyone been expelled from your class yet? Uraraka asked Midoriya. Yes, she was definitely asking Midoriya. She had turned to face him and everything. We've already lost 2 people. No, general studies isn't like the hero course, Shinso said bitterly. Although, I heard the examinations for entrance to general studies were quite strenuous. Ida added. They were fine. Shinso was clearly getting quite irritated by the unwanted interaction. How did you find them? Uraraka asked Midoriya. She was clearly trying to involve him in the conversation. Midoriya's selectively mute, Shinso snapped. Silence followed. Midoriya pocked his rice with his chopsticks glumly. Curse his stupid mouth. Why wouldn't it open when he wanted it to? Oh, I'm so sorry. Uraraka suddenly exclaimed. Midoriya could do nothing but smile and sign an apology that Shinso translated for him. You know, sign language could be super useful for heroics. Uraraka said, turning to Ida, changing the conversation abruptly. Yes, I suppose it could. I wonder if Mr. Aizawa will let us set something up to allow the class to learn it, he wondered aloud. Yeah, then we could talk properly. That was when a loud, blaring noise filled their ears. Midoriya squealed and covered his ears as the person on the other side of Ida explained the significance behind the sudden alarm. With Midoriya's ears ringing, Shinso dragged him out of his seat and down the halls. A rapid influx of people barged between them, pulling the two apart. Panic set in. It was a toxic mix of fear from the alarm and an anxiety driven from being separated from Shinso. Someone's elbow rammed into his head. It was Uraraka. Sorry, she exclaimed once she realized who it was. The two of them were pushed up close to the window overlooking the entrance to the school. Midoriya pulled on Uraraka's shoulder and directed her gaze towards the outside. There were the press, crowding an agitated present Mike and a scruffy-looking teacher with long black hair. "It's the press!" Uraraka exclaimed. She called out for Ida, whose head appeared over the crowd, not far from where the two were standing. "I have an idea." Midoriya signed to Uraraka on impulse. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," she replied. "Everyone calm down, it's just the press." Ida cried, but his voice couldn't be heard over the din the rest of the student body was making. Midoriya knew what they needed to do. He remembered Uraraka's quirk. She made him float back at the entrance exam. If she could make either herself or Ida float above the heads of everyone else, they could get their attention. He tapped Uraraka's shoulder again. "Float," he signed. "I don't understand sign language," she repeated. Midoriya pulled at his hair. "Come on, guess." "Float." He tried again. It was a simple sign. Surely it looked enough like it meant float for her to understand. But after yet another fail, Midoriya grasped her wrist, pulled her in close to his face and uttered the word, "Float." "Float," she repeated. Midoriya's eyes widened. He hadn't processed what he was doing. Did he really just manage to speak to a stranger? Ida must have heard what Uraraka said, because he reached out his hand over the crowd and yelled, "Make me float, Uraraka!" And so she did. Midoriya was stunned to see the engine exhaust pipes sticking out the bottom of Ida's legs. With a boost from his quirk, he went spinning across the heads of the students of UA and crashed into the wall above the exit sign. As he yelled his explanation at them, the pushing and pulling of the crowd halted, and Midoriya could breathe a sigh of relief. Shinso pushed through the crowd and made it to their side. "Are you okay?" he panted. Midoriya nodded furiously, still ecstatic that he had managed to overcome that blockage in his throat and communicate with Uraraka. She was still focusing on making sure Ida made it safely to the ground before realizing her quirk. "I spoke," Midoriya told Shinso excitably. "To her?" He frowned. Midoriya nodded and actually bounced on the spot. "That was a really good idea, Midoriya," Uraraka exclaimed as the crowds began to part. "Thank you," he signed and Shinso translated. This was immediately followed by Midoriya teaching Uraraka how to sign "thank you," whilst Ida hurried over to them. "Shall we go back to our seats before our lunch gets cold?" Ida suggested. "Sure," replied Uraraka. "Look, this is how you sign "thank you." "What did you say to her?" Shinso questioned as they all walked back to the cafeteria. "Only the word float. She couldn't figure out what it meant in sign and I was really frightened that you'd gone. I'm surprised I managed to say it." "Oh, what were you trying to sign to me earlier?" Uraraka questioned. "Did that mean float?" Midoriya nodded. "Can you show me again?" The rest of lunch break consisted mainly of teaching Uraraka and Ida various words in sign. Despite the panic derived from the press attack, by the end of the day, Midoriya wouldn't hesitate to admit that it had been one of the best days he'd had for a long, long time. And it wasn't over yet. Although, it didn't take long for Midoriya to realize Shinso seemed a little off as the day ended. No, it couldn't be. Was Shinso jealous of Midoriya speaking to Uraraka? "Thank you for helping me today," Midoriya told him as the two of them left school. "What did I do again?" he sighed. Midoriya took a deep breath. "You gave me the courage to speak." Shinso's eyes widened. Whatever emotion he could have been storing up immediately tossed to the wind. "I did. I don't think I could have ever done that if you hadn't been so kind to me." It was clear his friend didn't quite know how to respond. "I could only say one W word. But that's one word more than usual," he laughed meekly. "Hey, wait up you two." Midoriya jumped as he and Shinso turned. It was Uraraka again, with Ida jogging by her side. "Are you guys heading off to the train station?" "We'll come too," she explained. "I don't go all the way to the train station," Shinso admitted, "but Midoriya does." "We should walk together after school, would that be cool?" Uraraka questioned Midoriya. He nodded briskly, but then hesitated and glanced at Shinso. His friend smirked at him and gave him a reassuring nod. "Why yes," Midoriya stammered. The two hero students looked like they were about to cry. Ida even clutched his heart. They barely knew Midoriya, but speaking meant this much to them? The four talked animatedly as they wandered slowly towards the train station. Midoriya's comments were few and far between, but he was just honored to feel so included. Ida and Uraraka explained that they had researched what selective mutism was between lessons that afternoon and were just so thrilled that Midoriya had managed to overcome his mental barriers to speak with them after such a short space in time. Midoriya was quick to make sure they knew Shinso's part in all this. He wasn't sure if it was really their openness that allowed him to speak, or more his trust in Shinso. Midoriya would admit to being more than a little fearful when they parted ways with Shinso. He was so worried that as soon as his friend was gone, the clog in his throat would return. But although he could feel it there, somehow he could still push past. His sentences were filled with more stutters. He spoke slowly and quietly. But Uraraka and Ida were patient. And as Midoriya stepped off the train and made his way home, that spring in his step was oh so much clearer. "I'm home, Mum," he called out as he closed the door to his house behind him. "Izuku," she exclaimed as she hurried into view, her face displaying a rather shocked expression. "How was your day? You seem really happy." Yeah," he replied, putting down his rucksack and taking off his tie. I talked to Shinso." "You talked?" Inko cried. "Really? Izuku, I'm so proud of you." "It's really nothing, Mum." "It isn't. I mean, well, I managed to speak to a couple of other people as well." "Who?" Ida and Uraraka? They're in the hero course. Maybe they know Kaken." She squealed something that Izuku couldn't have possibly deciphered as she pulled him into a hug. "I haven't started making dinner yet, but how about katsudon? I know it's one of your favorites." "Oh, okay," he replied. "But, I'm going to go get changed out of my uniform first, then maybe go out for a bit." "Where?" she asked in curiosity. "Oh, I just found this empty stretch of beach not far from here. It's really quiet. I just want to go mess around on my guitar for a bit." "Of course, Izuku," Inko replied fondly. "But be back soon. You wouldn't want your dinner to get cold, and it looks like it might rain in a bit." "Okay, Mum." And with that, he pulled on the first set of clothing he located in his drawers, grabbed his guitar case and ran out the front door. Inko gazed fondly out the window as her son rushed off to reach the beach he mentioned before it rained. He always loved to play whenever he was feeling emotional. Whether it was because he was sad or angry, or apparently really happy. It had been so long since she'd seen him like this. It was about 10 months ago, after he leaped in to pull Katsuki away from that sludge villain attack, when he truly began to fall silent. He hadn't been great before, always fidgeting and stuttering, dreading the dawn of a new day, but it just got worse and worse as time went on. She was glad she'd convinced Izuku to take the entrance exams to UA, despite not being able to shoot for the hero course. This could really be the start of something wonderful. His mum was right about the rain. Midoriya couldn't see the ocean in its true majesty because of the looming clouds. But he didn't care. He was looking forward to the tranquility of the trash-covered beach of Dagoba. He didn't mind its filthy state if it meant he could play whatever he wanted without disturbing anyone. He also knew that his mother wouldn't have minded him playing in the house. In fact, she seemed to rather enjoy it, but Midoriya just wanted to be alone that evening after such an eventful day. He sat on top of the same pile of garbage that he had the first time he ventured into the sandy wasteland, leaving the case of his guitar by the abandoned boardwalk. Thunder crackled above him, and the cloud's first teardrops trickled down Midoriya's cheeks. Too late to hurry home, he just sat there and let the heavens open above him, not a thought concerning the welfare of his guitar crossing his mind. He'd left it out in the rain before. It certainly hadn't been too happy about the ordeal, but the water didn't have any long-lasting effects. Perhaps a certain waterproofing had been done to the wood. Despite the heavy clouds, Midoriya could still see the slightest hint of the fading day, an orange that swept across the sky, illuminating the raindrops and swelling waves ever so slightly, in a way that gave the illusion of fire rippling across the ocean and the sky. He smiled and began to play the first song that crossed his mind. It was a song that perhaps he would come to regret, but, at the same time, look back on with a grin wider than the one he sported at the moment. Fire to the Rain, Adele. This would be because, as the first chords rang out over the beach, something stirred in Midoriya's mind, swirling in his chest. It was a feeling that had always been there, an emotion of sorts that he only felt as he began to play his music. It was one of the reasons that he loved it so much. He just felt like he belonged to the rhythm. It was where he could forget the world and immerse himself in an entirely new one of his own. There was a lightness about this feeling today. It rose up, past the familiar clog in his throat, washing it away. And this was why, with a thought back to the friendly faces he had become accustomed to seeing, that of his friends, his confidence budded, and he opened his mouth. And he sang. My hands, they're strong. But my knees were far too weak. He let his voice echo across the beach, filling every crevasse, nook and cranny. He loved the way it reverberated in his chest, a feeling long lost within him. He had sung before, of course, everyone had at some point, whether it was simply humming along to the radio or a gleeful chorus of happy birthday at a friend's party. His mother had said there was something about Izuku's singing, a certain magic to it that no one could quite describe. It was as if he always conveyed the meaning of a song, brought out the emotion it intended into the world around him without a clear effort. But never before had he truly poured himself into a song like he did on that day. I set fire to the rain. Watching it pour. It was as though he was playing an ancient instrument, one he'd had with him for as long as he could remember, but never had the confidence to test and try. His throat felt sore and raspy from underuse, but somehow the music pushed through. When I lay with you, Midoriya gazed into the distance, eyeing the horizon as the sun continued to set. There was a break in the clouds now. Not enough to stop the rain nor to blind him with the fading sun, but enough to see its hazy silhouette above the earth's curvature. The rain wetted his hair and made the strings of his guitar slippery and difficult to navigate. Whether he struck a wrong note at some point or not, he could never have known. He was so lost in the music that it just didn't concern him anymore. Neither did the clinging of his clothes to his skin, or the salt of the air stinging on cracked lips. The rain, it glowed with the light of the sunset. It was so bright that each droplet could have been a star of its own. His mind played tricks on him when the drops sizzled as they landed on his guitar. And then the second chorus began. But I set fire to the rain. And the rain, it burned. The music came to an abrupt stop as Midoriya yelled, falling down the pile of rubbish he had perched upon and into the water below. With the sound of the song gone, the flames, too, began to fade, put out by the rain which no longer fueled it. Midoriya sat there breathing heavily in fear, knee-deep in the ocean as the waves tossed the salted water over his back. His guitar had fell a few feet away from him. Slowly, he clambered to his feet, waded through the water and retrieved it. It was covered in scorch marks. Midoriya blinked as he stared up at the sky and felt the rain pitter-patter against his face. The sun had set. The light illuminating the clouds had gone. So why had the rain continued to glow? Did he hallucinate? Why was his guitar covered in spots of black soot whilst his skin remained unharmed? Why did the beach continue to smolder around him? Hot pools of water seeped into his shoes as he climbed out of the sea and back onto the beach. Midoriya fell to the ground by his guitar case. He tested the water that had collected inside of it. Hot, almost too hot to touch. I set fire to the rain. Midoriya mumbled as the water fell heavier down on his head. It was in this moment that Midoriya's troubled mind drifted back to his entrance exam to UA and to his answer to a certain question. However, the recombinant frequency of quirklessness and having an extra joint is so low, because the alleles are so close together, that the inheritance of either gene separately is near to unheard of. Near to unheard of, he said out loud to himself. Near to? Not impossible. Rare, but possible. He tilted back his head and cried one last time, I set fire to the rain. But nothing happened. You're going crazy. Something must have leaked from the garbage, burned the guitar. And the hot water was just from the sunlight heating it up? Yeah. Definitely, Midoriya reasoned, pacing back and forth. What if it was his singing? Midoriya pulled out his phone, struggling to unlock it in the pouring rain. His mum hadn't messaged him quite yet. He still had time before he had to head home. He bit his lip. There's got to be a way to try this. And so, he tapped on his downloaded music and managed to reach the playlist created for his dance class, filled with normal and karaoke versions of hundreds of songs that they'd danced to over the years, and he tapped on the song he'd been looking for. A smile returned to his face as the familiar beat filled his ears. Walking on sunshine, Katrina and the waves. I used to think maybe you loved me, now baby I'm sure. He let himself prance across the sand, jumping on top of half-buried objects discarded there years ago. He twisted in the air, thoughts of a burnt guitar lost once more to the back of his mind as the upbeat rhythm consumed him. Now every time I go for the mailbox, gotta hold myself down. He laughed, dragging his feet in the sand as he almost tripped over an old tire. The rain had drenched him at this point, and his dip in the ocean hadn't helped. But now he couldn't even feel the coolness of the rain as it grew heavier still. He was completely lost in his dance, not caring about the squelching of his shoes and the sand stuck to the back of his trousers. Now I'm walking on sunshine. Whoa! And that was when the clouds right above his head parted, and a beaming ray of sunlight illuminated the spot where he stood, following his every movement like a spotlight. And as the chorus ended, laughing in ecstasy, he fell to the ground and turned off the music on his phone. The sunlight faded once more. Now that couldn't have been a coincidence. The sun had already set. Midoriya's mind raced. Thoughts of what would happen if he had kept singing mingled with what other songs could do, and, oh my god, I have a quirk. He leapt to his feet and screamed it to the sky, I have a quirk. The phone buzzed. It was his mother, wondering where he was. A grin still plastered across his face. Midoriya raced back over to his guitar case, zipped it shut, grasped its handle and took off. He ran nearly all the way home, only stopping when he had run out of breath. He trudged inside and closed the door behind him. Izuku, what happened? Did you really stay out in the rain? His mother cried when her son walked back in, dripping water everywhere. But then her gaze reached the expression on his face. What happened? She demanded. Izuku, you're scaring me. Mom, he said shakily, shivering in the cold, but he didn't mind. Mom, I have a quirk. But that's impossible. What is it? Singing, he breathed. Singing? Beep, what about your toe joint? It's possible, he explained, dropping the sodden guitar case by the door and pulling the instrument out, tipping excess liquid out of it and dropping it up by the radiator so it could dry. Rare, very rare, but not impossible. So, by definition, he said, grasping Inko's shoulders, possible. Tears welled in her eyes. Are you sure, Izuku? Mom, I sang Set Fire to the Rain and, he held up his scorched guitar, I set fire to the rain. She stroked the spots of ash on the instrument, gazing at the black substance left behind on her finger. Why have a quirk? She stammered, before she let her tears flow. Why you sang? And then Midoriya was crying too, tears mixing with rainwater and the salt the sea left behind on his clothes. But that was only the beginning. Midoriya woke up before his alarm the next morning. His dreams had been busy. Although he couldn't remember the details, he knew they had to be about his quirk somehow. He just couldn't stop thinking about it, all those years spent analyzing quirks and picking at their strengths and weaknesses. Finally, he had the chance to do that for his very own. Although he still wasn't completely convinced he had a quirk at all. Perhaps it had just all been a weird dream. But then Midoriya saw his guitar, still balancing against the radiator by the front door. And he saw the black spots covering it in its entirety. Yeah, not a dream. That was when the idea hit him. Before hurrying out of his house to begin the new day, Midoriya raced back to his room, grabbed his portable speaker and shoved it in the bottom of his rucksack. Mom? Midoriya called out as he stood by the door, ready to leave. Yes, Izuku? She replied at a much lower volume, reappearing right next to him at such a speed that Midoriya briefly wondered if her quirk included teleportation. Oh, I just wanted to say that I might be later home than usual today, he warned her. Are you going to that beach again? She frowned. If that's okay? Midoriya stammered, gripping the straps of his rucksack nervously. Well, honey, if you really think why you have a quirk, then you need to be exploring it somewhere a little safer. Dagoba's fine. Really, I'll be safe, I promise. Yes, but other people might not be, she acknowledged, glancing at the burnt guitar. Oh, Midoriya said, following her gaze, I suppose not. Why don't you ask UA? She suggested hopefully. They could help you register it. Yeah, I'll see if I can practice there then, he agreed. Inko teared up and threw herself into a hug. I'm so proud of you, Izu. You know that, right? Thanks, Mo. See you later. He pulled away after a moment and hurried out the door, leaving his mother staring after him, gripping the fret of his guitar fondly. There he is. Uraraka exclaimed as Midoriya ran up the hill towards them. Shinso wasn't too sure what he thought of Uraraka and Ida. The three of them had been waiting for Midoriya to arrive for the past 5 minutes, with Ida getting increasingly worried about being later than 10 minutes early to homeroom. Uraraka was definitely the one he preferred out of the two. She seemed light-hearted and kind, easy to befriend and easy to understand. But, just like Ida, she had it too easy. Neither of them had faced the troubles that Shinso had in terms of reaching for their dreams. Then again, it was nothing compared to Midoriya. He tried to hide it, but it was clear to see. Midoriya would have loved to be a hero, but his lack of a quirk held him back. Shinso couldn't help but wonder how different life would have been for Midoriya if he had just been born with a power of his own. Did you miss your train or something? Shinso questioned, eyeing the pair of green headphones hanging around Midoriya's neck. No, he replied. He was getting more confident with his speaking. Shinso couldn't help but feel a little bubble of pride rising in his chest. I just got a little lost in thought. What were you listening to? Uraraka quizzed as Ida encouraged them to hurry up and head toward school. Here, he replied before pulling off his headphones and handing them to Uraraka. She accepted them eagerly, standing close to Midoriya so the wire wouldn't pull them off. They walked in silence for a moment as Uraraka judged whatever she was listening to. This is such a cute song, she exclaimed rather loudly. Oh, was I shouting? She giggled after taking them off and handing them back. You should be cautious with the volume of your music, Ida instructed, chopping the air with his hand as he did so. Too loud and you could damage your hearing. Sorry. Midoriya squeaked as he turned it off, leaving the headphones around his neck. What was the song about? Uraraka questioned. I think I'm okay with English, but song lyrics are just beyond my capabilities if they're not well known anyway. Oh, it's called Wings, he answered. Midoriya's fluent, Shinso told her after he neglected to do so. Wait, in English? Uraraka gaped. I thought we were still talking about the song for a moment there, but seriously? Could you help with my English homework? Present Mike is way more confident in our abilities than he should be. As UA students, it's understandable that he thinks highly of our skills. Ida interjected. Skills that still don't exist, she laughed. The media had given up on standing on the school's doorstep, so thankfully it wasn't as much of a struggle to get through the gates this time around. The two hero students waved goodbye to Shinso and Midoriya as they reached the door to Class 1C. Uraraka was still humming the tune to Midoriya's song as she skipped away. For Shinso, the rest of the morning went by like any other ordinary day at UA. Midoriya, however, seemed distracted. He kept muttering to himself, nothing out loud, but the movements of his lips clearly indicated that his mind was transfixed on something. He kept scribbling things down in a notebook, periodically scrolling through his phone and occasionally putting on his headphones to listen to something for a while. However, it clearly wasn't for his enjoyment. The serious look on his face as he did this suggested otherwise. Shinso decided not to pry. If Midoriya was willing to tell him, he would, given time. That was the thing with Midoriya. You had to be patient. Wait your turn, and it would be worthwhile. Rush him into anything, and you would end up in a worse position than where you started. But Shinso would be lying if he said that he didn't have his own distractions to consider. The sports festival, it was just around the corner. Only a few weeks, and his moment to shine would arrive. His chance to finally get out of general studies. He hadn't been there long, but he was already sick of seeing the hero students waltz to class, hero costumes in hand. His only regret was that he wouldn't be able to bring Midoriya with him. However, as the day drew to a close, Shinso suddenly found himself with a reason to be happy to not be in Class 1A. When present Mike and a majority of UA's faculty members charged out of their lessons halfway through the day, leaving class presidents in charge without a hint as to what was going on, the collective student body began to panic. When they returned, Class 1C was told what happened. The hero course was attacked during a rescue training exercise at a place called the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, the USJ. They called themselves the League of Villains, and were hell-bent on killing All Might. Not that Midoriya said a word, but it was clear to Shinso that he was beside himself with worry. Before the disruptive afternoon came to a close, the students of Class 1A returned to the main campus. Their arrival wasn't hard to miss, and Midoriya waited agitatedly by the entrance to Class 1C for them to walk by. "Hey, Midoriya!" Uraraka called out excitably as she and Ida arrived alongside the rest of their colorfully clothed classmates. The expression on his face melted into visible relief as he saw how little cuts and bruises marred their faces. "Is everyone okay?" Shinso questioned, voicing what he knew Midoriya would have said if it weren't for all the other students milling around him, heading off to retrieve their things or be checked out by Recovery Girl in the infirmary. "Thanks to the teachers," Uraraka answered. "And Ida? He was great. He managed to get out and ran all the way here to get help. Whilst everyone else stayed and fought, of course," he reminded her. "Hey, it could have gone a lot worse if it weren't for you," she snapped. "Don't beat yourself down about it." Shinso didn't miss Midoriya's nervous fidgeting as some of the soon-to-be heroes marched by. Another thing he acknowledged was the glare of an explosively dressed boy, whose red eyes met Midoriya's green ones for a split second. Shinso wondered what the story behind that was, if there was one at all and the guy didn't just emit an aura of touch me and I kill you. Both are equally likely to be true. "Nice hero costumes," Shinso said, changing the subject. "Why thank you," Ida replied, doing his chopping the air thing again as he explained its various practicalities and features. It reminds me of Ingenium's costume," Midoriya stammered. "He's my elder brother," Ida announced proudly. Midoriya proceeded to gush over how cool he thought the hero was for the next 3 minutes. Shinso, meanwhile, was not as impressed. Typical, Ida had everything handed to him on a silver platter. He was born with the perfect quirk and the perfect opportunity to reach for the stars. Shinso had to work for it, but he would, harder than any other, and he would prove them wrong. "I should have been more specific with mine," Uraraka laughed feebly. "It's skin-tight. I would have preferred it to be a little looser, but I'm kind of getting used to it." "They're both really good," replied Midoriya. "Hey, what are you two doing out there?" It was Ochi, who threw the door open dramatically. She blinked in surprise when she spotted the 2 hero students. "We were talking," Shinso replied coldly. "Well, present Mike should be back any minute, and he left me in charge," she snapped. "Can't you at least get in here and look like you've been doing some work?" Yes," Ida suddenly exclaimed. "We should probably return to our own class and check on what we should be doing next." "Lead the way, class rep." Uraraka grinned. "See you guys soon." Midoriya waved weakly as Shinso dragged him back into the classroom as to not aggravate Ochi more than necessary. Like most of general studies, she wasn't fond of the hero core students, and perhaps wasn't keen on that fact that they were conversing. Fortunately, present Mike returned only moments later, and began to explain that school would be ending a little early whilst the matters surrounding the USJ attack was dealt with. "You're welcome to hang about if your train doesn't leave the station until the day's officially up, but other than that, you're officially dismissed," he announced overdramatically. Nearly all of the class got up immediately, chattering amongst themselves in already tight-knit friendship groups as they left the room behind present Mike. The only one who didn't, in fact, was Midoriya. "Can't you get an earlier train?" Shinso questioned curiously as he noticed Midoriya made no effort to pack away his various things. He shrugged and then signed, "I've still got some work to finish, and I'll concentrate better here than at home. I think I'll wait until the day's officially up." "I can wait with you if you want some company," Shinso offered. Midoriya shook his head frantically. "It's really fine. I'll only be writing anyway. So, see you tomorrow?" It seemed rather dismissive, but again, if Midoriya didn't want Shinso to know something, then Shinso would give it time, and leave him to it, hoping that one day he'd trust him enough to explain. Sure, see you tomorrow. After all, Shinso didn't really want to stick around to deal with the press mobbing the school again after news of the USJ attack got out. Midoriya felt awful about lying to Shinso, but he just wasn't ready to tell him about his quirk, not until he was sure what it actually was. Moreover, if he did tell him, he would have to show his quirk to him, and that would require singing. He'd just barely gotten used to talking. Singing would take a little more time to get used to. With all the chaos surrounding the USJ attack, most students headed home as quickly as they could, and few noticed Midoriya lagging behind. He knew he told Mum that he would ask for permission to practice his quirk at school so it could get registered, but if he couldn't even muster the courage to tell Shinso, how could he possibly tell a teacher? That was why, only once he was sure everyone who knew him had gone, Midoriya mustered the courage to pack up his things and hurry out of Class 1C. From the tour at the beginning of term, Midoriya knew vaguely where the different gyms and halls were situated around UA. Eventually, he found himself at the door to the spacious hall where they had played dodgeball against Class 1D only a few days prior. In the panic of leaving school early, someone had forgotten to lock the doors, and Midoriya let out a thankful sigh of relief as it swung open for him. Once inside, he shut the door behind him and flicked on the light switch, revealing a massive, empty space for him to work with. He took off his blazer and tie, leaving them in a pile by his rucksack. Then, after delving for some time, he managed to locate his little speaker and plugged it into his phone. After it was set up, Midoriya finally pulled out a pen and his new notebook, which he had titled Quirk Analysis. It was a title that was inconspicuous enough to be ignored by anyone who picked it up, thinking it was another one of his hero analysis notebooks, but different enough for Midoriya to distinguish. It wasn't just any quirk analysis notebook, it was analysis on his quirk. Okay, Midoriya mumbled, letting his thoughts tumble out into reality without fearing anyone could hear them. He picked up his notebook and began pacing around the hall, rereading his notes so they were fresh in his mind. So, my quirk activates whenever I sing a song, and it seems to give me a power whilst I'm singing that correlates with the meaning behind the song in question. And then I can't use that power again for a limited amount of time, probably. That would explain why singing Set Fire to the Rain didn't work twice in a row. The power also seems to get stronger the longer I sing the song. For example, for my first song at the beginning, the rain only grew hot, but then set alight when the music swelled for the second chorus. So, the strength of the power depends on how far through the song I am. He paused, tapping his pen on his lip thoughtfully. After a moment, he flipped through the notebook a little further, past the blank pages he'd left for further analysis, and reached his pages on possible songs and what abilities they could grant him. Sure, he was getting a little ahead of himself. There was still a looming possibility that all this was just a freak accident, and that he had no quirk at all, but, for the first time in a while, Midoriya had allowed himself to be optimistic. With these detrimental thoughts of it all being a big misunderstanding, Midoriya realized there was only one way to prove to himself that he really had a quirk: sing a song that would grant him a power that would very clearly not be a fluke. So, he jogged back over to his phone and speaker, left his notebook by his bag, and tapped on one of the songs he'd been considering all day long. Thunder, Imagine Dragons. As the music started, he didn't feel that pressure in his chest as he began to sing. Not a worry crossed his mind of being heard, so the words came with ease. I was dreaming of bigger things and wanna leave my old life behind. The song carried on. It was familiar to Midoriya. He had heard it many times, over and over again. The sound of the drums seemed to find a rhythm with every other beat of his heart. It was so easy to sink into the music, to drift away from thoughts of villain attacks and anxiety. When he was alone with his music, everything was okay. I was lightning before the thunder. A smile broke across his face, his feet moving in time to the rhythm. He twisted and he turned, not caring how messy and unchoreographed his dancing would have looked. He was enjoying himself. That was all that really mattered. Thunder. Feel the thunder. He could have sworn the whole building shook as he slammed his feet on the ground. The sound of thunder echoed around him. And as the chorus ended, lightning then the thunder. With a crash and a flash of light, Midoriya screamed. The lights flickered, swaying above him. When they returned to normality, panting, Midoriya gazed down at his feet. Right there, next to him, was a scorch mark far greater than those left peppered across his guitar, the mark left behind by a lightning bolt. Midoriya stood there for a moment in shock, staring at the blacked floor. And then he laughed, running back over to his phone and switching off the music. Oh yeah, he most definitely had a quirk. Jotting down the results of his first test in his notebook, Midoriya sat by his bag, unable to stifle the massive grin splitting across his face. But what now? He picked up his phone and scrolled down through what he had most recently played, when he stumbled across the song Uraraka had been listening to earlier that day. Unlike the other songs he had thought of testing, Midoriya wasn't too sure what this could bring. But how could he ever know for sure until he tried it out for himself? There was something about this song, a certain understanding and belonging. It was like he could relate to it more than it most likely intended. It was likely about love, about two people finding safety and serenity in each other's company. But Midoriya didn't quite see it like that. He felt like it was about a guardian angel, someone who would lift you up from your darkest moments in life. That someone could be anyone, surely, his mother, his friends, even himself, a part of himself with the confidence to soar above the negativity of others and reach for the stars. Say you'll catch me when I fall. He almost forgot about his quirk in that moment, deep in thought about the meaning behind the music. So, with a sense of surprise which was becoming routine alongside new powers at this point, the chorus arrived. Wrap your wings around my body. Midoriya wasn't dancing this time, just singing to the empty hall. Perhaps it was because he wasn't moving that he was able to maintain his composure and keep singing when the power activated and a pair of massive green wings wrapped themselves around him. Struggling to keep in tune, Midoriya spun around on the spot, trying to figure out where the mass of feathers had come from. It was only when he managed to reach the small of his back with his fingertips that he realized the wings were his, protruding from beneath his shoulder blades. He tried not to laugh with a mixture of shock and gleefulness as it dawned on him that yes, he had just grown wings. When we stood on the skyline, there was no turning back, and you said not to stare at the ground. He slowly let the wings unravel and droop behind him like a cape of feathers. He was still singing when he tested his new limbs, moving them about unsurely in a similar manner to how a newborn foal would wobble on its legs, still grinning like a fool. When he realized the next chorus was about to begin, he hurried back to his bag and spread his wings to their fullest extent, crouching like he was at the start of a 100-meter dash. When I'm lost in the storm, and I'm calling. When the familiar chorus began, he pushed himself forward, picking up as much speed as he could before flapping his great wingspan, and it wasn't long before his feet were no longer touching the ground. Wrap your wings, wrap your wings. Wrap your wings around my body. When he almost hit the wall on the opposite side of the hall, he turned clumsily in the air. Managing not to yell in fright, he somehow changed direction. Whilst being thankful for the hall's ridiculously high ceiling, Midoriya hooped in joy when the song allowed him to do so. Before long he was somersaulting, twisting and turning with ease. After his initial struggle, flying came so effortlessly to him. It was instinct, as natural as it would be for a fledgling bird, given time. Midoriya didn't know if it was his own body or if it was part of his quirk that allowed this to be true, but he didn't really care at this point. We're flying above the valley below. In his euphoria, with the wind blowing in his hair and through his feathers, he felt lost to the world. For here, alone in the hall at UA, Midoriya finally had a reason to fly. However, he wasn't quite as alone as he thought he was. Present Mike wouldn't be ashamed to admit that he was glad he didn't have to go on patrol that evening, nor did he have to attend to his radio show, because yes, Aizawa was wrong, he did have backup plans for when his hero life took priority over his various other jobs, and with that, came backup radio hosts. It was almost a shame it hadn't been a Friday. He only played non-stop music on Fridays, so there was really no need in him being there at the radio station. But it was a Wednesday, so never mind. That day sure had been eventful, and the following few days were bound to not be much sanctuary. They'd only just gotten rid of the press, and now they'll be back at it again. It was like the media were flies, and their fly spray wasn't as effective as the packet said it was. This was one of the reasons he chose to stay behind at UA's main campus after school was ended early. The longer he could postpone leaving and having to run into the hordes of reporters, the better. Another reason was so that he could have something to do whilst he waited for the hospital to give him the all-clear to check up on his friend Aizawa. It had been rather de-stressing seeing his old school friend so blooded and bruised like that. Anyway, someone had to sweep the school to make sure everyone had gone home before the police could start their investigations. There were only a few third years lagging behind anyway, taking advantage of the chaos to spend some extra time with the school's resources before the day was up. This mainly involved the support classes, but no change there. They'd always been difficult to get away from their workbenches. So, when Yamada wandered up to Principal Nedzu's office, he was pretty convinced the school was empty and was pleased to report so. "Good evening, Present Mike." Nedzu chimed happily as Yamada entered the office. "Hey, Principal Nedzu," he replied with equal enthusiasm. "Just to give you a heads up, the school seems clear from top to bottom if you want to let the police do whatever they need to do." Yes. Did you check the entire school?" Yamada hesitated. "Did I miss someone?" he guessed. He'd checked everywhere he could have thought of where a student might have been. "One of your first years, it would appear," Nedzu informed him. He frowned. "Who?" "Izuku Midoriya." "Okay, that was a little off. Sign language kid?" The principal waved him over to his desk, where his beady eyes were transfixed on his computer screen. Present Mike jogged over in utmost curiosity. But when his own eyes rested on what Principal Nedzu was watching, his glasses almost fell off in shock. "He has wings." Yamada gaped. "I thought he was quirkless. How in the—" "Look closer," the principal insisted. Yamada did, but he wasn't too sure what the principal was implying. "He is unsure and unsteady," he explained when no revelation was made on Yamada's part. "Not used to this power. This is why I have reason to believe that the boy has only just realized he has a quirk at all." "That's impossible," Yamada insisted. "You get a quirk at like 4, and that's it." "Midoriya's quirk appears to be rather peculiar," Nedzu continued. "He summoned a lightning bolt earlier." "He did what?" "Did you not hear it?" "I did. That is why I decided to check the security feed." "Why don't you go and speak with him?" Nedzu instructed in a polite manner that made it sound like it was only a request, one which Yamada didn't necessarily have to fulfill, but he knew better. "You are his homeroom teacher, after all, and you are one of the only members of staff who can confidently communicate with sign language. However, it is a shame these security cameras don't have a sound system. Look at his mouth, it's moving. Therefore, he is either talking to himself, or perhaps he is singing. But he's mute. And quirkless." Nedzu smiled in an unintentionally menacing way. "But you can't know for sure until you see for yourself. For example, how could one know that Japan is an island if they have never seen the ocean? How could they know the sea exists at all, or the rest of the world, for that matter? My point is, you can either trust in the evidence laid before you by another or set out to retrieve that evidence yourself. I believe that the latter is the better option in this situation. Not only for us, but for Midoriya too, who has just realized he has a phenomenal power after spending his entire life facing a horrid prejudice for not having one at all." Present Mike, meanwhile, was still staring, dumbfounded, at one of his youngest, most feeble students, doing backflips in the air like he'd been flying his entire life. He just nodded senselessly at Nedzu's lecture. Once he was sure it was finished, he darted out of the room as fast as he possibly could, and sprinted all the way to the hall where Midoriya had hidden himself away in. Panting, he hesitated by the entrance, hand hovering over the doorknob. He could hear the faint echo of music from within. He thought Nedzu was kidding when he suggested Midoriya could have been singing. "We're flying above the valley below." Present Mike opened the door as slowly and quietly as he could. His mouth hung open as he closed it behind him, not daring to take his eyes away from the student that he thought he'd be protecting from everyone and everything for the next 3 years. Not in a million years did he think he'd be facing something like this, and he'd just come back from a villain attack at the USJ, not Universal Studios Japan, but the two were easy enough to confuse. The music swelled as Midoriya repeated those lyrics. They were the very first words Present Mike had ever heard him utter. Here he was, soaring high above him in a hall for hero students, without a care in the world. He dipped and dived, twisting and turning with apparent ease, having the time of his life. "Wrap your wings around my body," the boy whooped with glee. How he hadn't noticed Yamada yet was beyond him. Perhaps he was so enthralled with his seemingly newfound ability that his mind simply blocked Yamada out of his peripheral vision. "Wrap your wings, wrap your wings, wrap your wings around." That was when he finally caught his eye. The music that reverberated from the little speaker at Present Mike's feet continued, but Midoriya's mouth stopped moving immediately, eyes wide with surprise and fear. Yamada faltered, before reaching down and pressing pause on Midoriya's phone, letting silence fill the hall once more. Midoriya just hovered there for a moment, before a sudden realization seemed to wash over him and he frantically begun his descent. He fell to the ground with a thud, his wings disappearing in a burst of green feathers not far off the floor. Rushing towards him, Yamada fell to his knees by Midoriya's side. The boy breathed heavily and frantically, sitting right in the middle of a large, sprawling scorch mark in the middle of the hall. "Hey there, little listener," Yamada said softly to him. He had his knees tucked up to his chest, eyes darting around in panic, as if looking for anyone else who might have heard him. "It's all right. Take deep breaths for me, okay? Like this, breathe in and breathe out, okay? And again, breathe in and out." It took longer than Yamada would have liked for Midoriya to calm down even a little bit. Eventually, he opened his mouth to say something, but all that came out was a strangled squeak. Midoriya grasped his throat like something was strangling him as he desperately tried to force the words out. "Hey, look at me," Present Mike insisted. Midoriya looked up hesitantly, eyes brimming with tears. "You're not in trouble, don't worry, and you don't have to speak to me if you don't want to," he signed, not speaking so the kid wouldn't feel like he had to do the same. His shoulders relaxed a little, his hand leaving his throat. He closed his mouth and gave Yamada a feeble nod. "That was pretty awesome," Yamada added eagerly. Midoriya seemed rather surprised by that. He blinked back the tears, his mouth slightly agape. "So, you have a quirk after all?" He tensed up again. Wow, it was kind of hard to read his body language and react accordingly. "I'm not telling you off," insisted Yamada. "Is this a new thing? You looked pretty confident with the whole flying around the place ordeal." New Midoriya signed simply. "So, you can sprout wings whenever you want? That sounds like an incredible quirk." Midoriya shook his head. "Right? Principal Nedzu had mentioned a lightning bolt." Yamada glanced down at the scorch mark. "How did that work?" "I'm so sorry." Midoriya signed quickly in a jittery manner as he followed Yamada's gaze. "I didn't think, but I had nowhere else safe to practice. It was silly of me, I know. I promise I won't do it again. Damage school property or use my quirk or—" "Hey, no need to panic," Present Mike exclaimed. The sudden sound startled the kid a little. "You're in a hero school, students damage stuff all the time, and this is just a scorch mark. Seriously, you've got nothing to worry about," he spoke and signed at the same time. "I still shouldn't have used the lightning bolt," Midoriya insisted. "I was just so excited and I'd been wondering about it all day." "I'm sorry. If you didn't use the lightning bolt then I wouldn't have realized you were here," said Yamada, deciding to leave Principal Nedzu and his hidden cameras out of the conversation for the time being. "And I think being here's a good thing. Because now I get to see your quirk, and it's really confusing me." Midoriya laughed. It was little, very quiet, but it was something. "It's confusing me too. That's why I'm here. Do you know what it is?" Yamada questioned. Midoriya wavered, holding his hands up as he thought through his response. "Singing." "Singing?" Yamada repeated after a moment. "How?" He didn't meet Yamada's eyes as he continued to sign. "Each song gives me a different power." Present Mike thought back to the song he had just heard him singing. It had been about wings, and the boy consequently had wings. "That is awesome." He didn't even flinch at the raised volume that time. "You really think so?" "Hell yeah. Just think of the possibilities." "Well, there are downsides too. I only get the powers whilst I'm singing and for a few moments after I stop." And as sometimes the quirk only kicks in quite late into the song, usually in the chorus, and then gets stronger after that. And then I can't use the same song again for a while. B. But I haven't had much time to P practice. I don't know what other L limitations there are, he explained, his movements jerky and a little difficult to understand, but Yamada didn't mind. Of course, there are limitations. Yamada laughed, leaping to his feet. All quirks have their own little problems. But with a power like that, kid, you could become a hero. Midoriya jerked his head suddenly at the words, staring up at present Mike with wide eyes. You think I can be a hero? A smile broke out over Yamada's face. He had met quite a few selectively mute kids in his past. They usually took a lot longer to trust him enough to speak. He wondered if this was Shinso's doing. He and Midoriya had grown rather close over the short time in which they'd known each other. Perhaps a friend like that was what Midoriya needed to help him get out of his shell. Although, maybe that wasn't the only reason why he spoke. Yeah. Present Mike yelled, holding out his hand and pulling Midoriya to his feet. And it's not just the quirk either. I mean, you're smart. 91% in that entrance exam was no easy feat. Then hey, just look at what you did in dodgeball the other day. Not only were you super cool helping out all your other classmates with their quirks, but remember that flip. Holy shoot, no one in the staff room believed me when I said you could do that. Who'd have thought you were so athletic? There were tears rolling down Midoriya's face, his bottom lip shaking. It's from D-dance class, he explained shakily. You dance? How can you get any more awesome? Now he was laughing and crying at the same time, trying to rub the tears away, but to no prevail. No, wait, let me guess, you play an instrument, don't you? Because if you don't, that's the next step up. Wait, was that a nod? That was a nod. You play. What do you play? You know what, tell me later when your eyes have stopped leaking. Sound like a plan? That was when Midoriya threw himself at Yamada, in a very tearful, shaking embrace. Careful of the shoulder spikes. Yamada warned Midoriya as he hugged him back. They stood like that for a while, as present Mike waited patiently for Midoriya's tears to run out. They did calm down a little, but Yamada started to suspect his supply was never-ending. Did you ever want to be a hero, little listener? Present Mike frowned as he pondered Midoriya's dramatic response to such simple words. Midoriya pulled away and nodded tentatively. Well, he started, thinking hard about what to do next. The sports festival is coming up, if they're still going through with it after the USJ attack thing. I think they will. Principal Nedzu thought it would be a good way of showing the world that we at UA are standing tall. Anyway, if someone from General Studies shows enough promise, we can consider transferring them to the hero course later in the year. Midoriya rubbed away the last of his tears. His face lit up for a moment, before he turned away and fiddled nervously with his fingernails. But, then I'd have to use my quirk in front of everybody. Well, yeah, you'd need to if you want to be a hero, but why? Oh, is it because of the singing? He nodded. Present Mike pouted, his arms crossed. That sure was a tricky one. How could the mute kid with a voice quirk possibly learn how to use it? Well, from what I've heard so far, your singing is about as awesome as everything else you seem to do, he proclaimed. Midoriya gave him a weak smile. Thank you. All you need is a little more confidence. Yamada concluded. But in such short notice? The kid barely knew what his quirk was capable of, let alone his voice and anxiety issues. It all started with a bit of a light bulb moment. Ever listen to my radio show, Midoriya? Another nod. Well, then you'd know I've always had a bit of a problem with my Thursday shows, yeah? Yes. Everything else is all thought out, guests in on certain days, music on Fridays, you know. Every day has its specific schedule, except Thursdays. Which changes every week, Midoriya finished. Exactly. Present Mike said with a click of his fingers. So, you have problems when talking to most people face to face? Yeah. Well, what about over the radio? Midoriya's eyes widened. What? Tomorrow's Thursday, he continued to explain. If you come with me after school, I could take you to the radio station and you could be a guest. How does that sound? Terrifying, he gaped. Present Mike laughed. but it would improve your confidence. That sounds really great. But I just don't think I can do it. So many people listen to your radio show. No one would need to know who you are, he offered. You hardly speak to anyone, so they won't recognize you. He started kicking at the scorch mark beneath his feet, avoiding Yamada's gaze again. Look, Midoriya, he sighed, crouching down to look up at him. You're a great kid, with an incredible mind and an incredible power. I want to help you. You can be a hero. All you need to do is make this one brave step and you're on your way. And if you really can't do it, then you can back out. There's no pressure. He looked into his eyes again, before reaching up behind him to rub the place where his wings had been. There was no hole in his shirt. It was such an amazing ability. He could do so much good with it. All he needed to do was say, "Okay." Present Mike blinked. "Okay? You'll give it a go?" Midoriya clenched his hands into fists, took a deep breath and nodded surely. "Why, his teacher cried, leaping up excitably. "Good on you, Songbird." Songbird. Well, you need a code name, fledgling hero. Got a different one? Midoriya hesitated. That was when he thought back to something Shinso had said not long ago. You don't have to pressurize yourself to speak. I can keep translating for you at school if you want, and Cockatoo can too. Cockatoo? Present Mike, obviously. And then his mind drifted to that passage about little birds singing in the depths of coal mines so long ago. Little heroes that kept singing until the very end. Why, you'll be Cockatoo, Midoriya stated timidly. Present Mike howled with laughter. Is because of the hair. That's brilliant. I love it, but what about you? That I'll be Canary. Hey, Mum. Inko looked up in surprise. Izuku rarely spoke during meals. There had been a time where it was hard for her to get him to eat at all. Yes, Izuku? She replied tentatively. So, I did what you said to do yesterday, he continued, not looking up from his food. What was that, honey? To, practice my quirk at school. He was jabbing at the rice with his chopsticks now, clearly nervous about talking to her about this. Oh, she exclaimed, you talked to a teacher? Well, I didn't want to talk to anyone. It just sort of happened. Right? Inko pushed encouragingly, a smile spreading across her face. It was my homeroom teacher, Present Mike. The man on the radio? Inko remembered. Oh yes, I remember you telling me, he knows Jisoo, doesn't he? Yeah, he was stirring it absent-mindedly now. He said my quirk was really cool. See? The teachers at UA aren't like the ones at your old school. Inko said triumphantly, are you going to eat any more, Izuku? He shook his head and pushed the bowl towards her as she began to tidy away the various cups and bowls strewn across the table. And, Mum? Well, he said that if I did well in the sports festival with it, I could make it into the hero course. Inko's hands froze over the tap, turning back to her son. She saw the shaky smile on his face and before long, her expression matched. Really, Izuku? Oh, that's so wonderful. And singing? Are you sure the quirk was about singing? He nodded surely. I figured out how to grow wings and everything. Wings? Yeah. But, if I want to get to the hero course, I need to sing in the sports festival, in front of all those people. Inko stirred the water in the washing up bowl thoughtfully. Well, you could always take singing lessons? Actually, Present Mike had a different idea. Aha. Well, he said that all I needed was a little practice and confidence. Yes, but wouldn't that be exactly what singing lessons supply? Inko frowned. She wasn't looking at her son now as she scrubbed the bowls diligently. Izuku got up from his chair and hurried over to her side, drying whatever items she had finished with. Maybe, but not like this, he explained vaguely. Well, are you going to keep me in the dark or tell me what he's suggested? She laughed, handing the chopsticks to Izuku. He might have suggested that I go on his radio show with him. Inko froze. Oh, on his radio show? Today? At about 6:30? I was going to tell you about it last night, but then you got that email saying school would be closed today because of that villain attack, and, well, I kind of forgot. He didn't look her in the eye, furiously wiping off the remaining suds. Did you say yes? He tensed up. Izuku, you have to say yes, she insisted, grasping his shoulders with soapy hands. This is an incredible opportunity. Even if you don't make it onto the hero course, you could end up finding a little job at the radio station. It's linked to his hero agency, you know. Oh, Izuku, please don't tell me you said no. I said yes. Inko teared up, pulling him into a hug. I'm really proud of you. Thanks, Mum, he sobbed. But I don't know if I can do it. She pulled away, reaching up to cup her son's face in her hands fondly. It's a radio show. You're not talking to anyone but Present Mike face to face. Hardly anyone's had the privilege of hearing your voice before, so they won't know it's you unless you say your name. I'm not saying my N name. I'm going to use a C code name like the heroes Deku. What is it? C Canary? Like a songbird, she concluded with a wide smile. When you walk into that radio studio, you aren't Izuku anymore, okay? You're Canary. And Canary can be whoever you want him to be. You can be brave and kind and confident. Everything you are and more, everything you know you can be. He faltered for a moment, before nodding with a bright smile. I'll be listening for sure. So, if you ever feel nervous, just think about me listening in, and that no one else can hear you. Midoriya would be lying if he said he didn't already know where Present Mix Hero Agency was. He knew about a lot of the hero agencies around Mizudafu, and because of how much he enjoyed the radio show, Present Mix wasn't an exception. The news was rife with talk on the USJ attack that had occurred the day before. It was all anyone was thinking about. Midoriya, however, was a different story. As he stepped off the train and hurried along the streets, his eyes filtered past the billboards covered in information about arrested villains and Class 1A, as he scanned the buildings for the telltale sign of the hero agency he was looking for. It didn't take long for him to find it. Before he knew it, Midoriya was standing on the doorstep, quite literally shaking in his boots. He must have been there for a while because the tinted glass doors suddenly opened to reveal a blue-skinned lady, wearing a pair of headphones over messy, indigo hair. She narrowed her eyes at him momentarily before asking, "It's Izuku Midoriya, right?" Midoriya nodded frantically. The blue lady broke out into a wide smile, flashing a set of rather sharp, pearly white teeth. "Well, hey there, Canary. Don't be shy, come on in." She helped the door open for him and Midoriya stepped hesitantly inside. Present Mike said you'd be a bit of a nervous wreck. Not in those words exactly, of course, but that's what you look like, a nervous wreck. Reminds me of my first day here, terrifying, she laughed. I'm Izora, by the way. Not a pro hero, nor sidekick, but I do my bit. Midoriya's eyes darted around his new surroundings as Aozora led him straight to the elevator. There wasn't much to see first off, just a brightly colored reception area where several employees chatted happily amongst themselves. They saw Aozora and gave her a wave. Their gaze drifted over to Midoriya. One gave him finger guns and proceeded to type something on his computer. Aozora pushed him into the elevator before he could even wave back. So, Aozora began, tilting her head towards Midoriya and giving him that frightening grin once more. Present Mike said you had a singing quirk. That's majorly cool. She pressed the floor number as the doors of the elevator closed. We've got quite a few voice quirk heroes around here, that and like listening heroes and stuff. I don't know, I don't really pay attention. She laughed. You see, I help manage the radio aspect of this place now. We cross over with the hero side quite a lot, but that doesn't mean I know everyone's quirks inside and out. Midoriya gulped nervously as the lift began to rise up through the building. He caught his reflection in the mirrored walls of the elevator. Aozora was right. He did look like a nervous wreck. You listen to our radio, kid? Midoriya nodded anxiously. Good answer, 'cause if you do well you might be here for a while. Not like, stuck in the building or anything, but you'll probably be hanging around, you know? Quite a few of us here started out like you, with no idea what we're doing and just going with the flow. But hey, the flow worked out, am I right? With a soft ding, the elevator doors opened again. Aozora waltzed out confidently, with Midoriya scurrying along behind her. Here, look. Midoriya ground to a halt beside Aozora. She was pointing through a window at a room filled with rows of computers, most of which had workers sitting behind them, frowning at their screens or talking to someone through their headsets. So, if you do listen to the radio, then you'll know about our emergency number, right? Aozora questioned. Midoriya gave her another nod. We're like a hero version of not that you wouldn't be able to get a hero if you called the emergency services, but our version if purely for our agency. We deal with a lot of domestic violence stuff, kids with mental health problems, crimes or dangerous situations that are a little more out of the public eye. It's not so flashy, but still super important. It's also kind of perfect for the types of quirks our heroes have. Maybe not so much Present Mike, he's a little loud, but like other people who can defuse situations or sneak into places unseen. Midoriya gazed curiously into the room. He remembered hearing Present Mike ecstatically announce the telephone number over the air sometimes, saying if you ever need a hero, to just call up, and they'd be there. I worked in there for a while, and trust me when I say you feel like a real hero, not the kind of guy who wears a fancy costume and who's got an amazing power like yours, but someone who can make a difference, you get what I mean? But it's tough work, really distressing when things don't turn out okay. You've got a feel for those guys, she said, nodding towards her colleagues. But they do a good job. Aozora didn't let Midoriya stand there for much longer. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him back down the corridor as she continued to speak, filling in the gaps so Midoriya didn't have to. We've got the mainstream heroes too, like Present Mike, who go on patrols and protect the neighborhood from the kind of villains you see in the media. Then we've got the heroes who stay in the background and go to the places they're called to by the, well, we call it the white noise team. Those guys back there head the operation, and then more underground type heroes deal with the situation, get it? Midoriya nodded. He was doing a lot of that, but Aozora wasn't giving him much time to breathe. Before long, they were back in the elevator and heading up higher into the building. Sorry, I just thought you'd want to see that. I love a good tour, we don't give enough of them. We're almost out of time, whoops. We'll go straight to the studio then. As soon as the doors opened once more, Aozora steered Midoriya into a rather large room that seemed to be designed to be as comfortable as possible. The floor was carpeted, sofas were dotted about everywhere, there was a TV hanging on the wall, although it was permanently muted. There were various computers dotted around the place, beside far too many scary-looking monitors with blinking lights. At the far end was a long window, obscured by a set of beige blinds. A man sat in a chair in front of them, his headphones on, fiddling with various buttons and switches on a complicated-looking panel before him. Hey, Nakano, Aozora called out. The man did a double take before taking off his headphones and turning around in his chair. Ah, is that Canary? Midoriya waved feebly. Nakano laughed. Yamada said you'd be a little nervous. I know it's easier said than done, but try not to worry about it all. Present Mike will be out in a moment. He'll put a song on and then we'll be on our way. With that, he turned back around and put his headphones on once more. Come, sit down with me, Aozora insisted, dragging Midoriya over to a random sofa. She sighed as she took the weight off her feet. God, today's been long. You hear about the villain attack at UA? Oh, of course you have, you go there. Anyway, I was going to take you around the news floor, but it's for the best that we didn't, come to think of it. Everyone's in an absolute frenzy over it. But you see, Present Mike won't give us any intel on it, for obvious reasons, not that we're pushing him or anything, there's no need really. But anyway, we've got what we needed from other sources, but there's still plenty of. Midoriya zoned out pretty quickly. It wasn't as though he wasn't interested, but his mind was elsewhere. First of all, oh my God, Present Mike had been talking about him to his radio friends, which was a terrifying thought. Then, and rather more urgently, he was about to go on the radio for the very first time. Ewa, there he is. Midoriya nearly jumped out of his skin as Present Mike's familiar voice cut through the air. He stood up and turned around, but he was out of his hero costume, and this, for some reason, was not what Midoriya had expected him to look like. He wore rather ordinary, wire-rimmed glasses, unlike the bright yellow shades he usually sported. His hair was long, really long. That much was obvious from the way it was spiked up in his hero costume, but without all the hair gel, It would have hung loosely around his shoulders if he hadn't tied it up in a bun. The only part of his hero costume he still wore was his leather jacket, which was no longer done up, showing a simple white shirt underneath. Midoriya didn't know why the look surprised him so much. Did he seriously expect he looked like Present Mike all the time? Shh! Yelled Aozora. I told you he'd be shocked when you weren't in your hero costume. Midoriya blushed furiously and stared at his shoes in panic. Don't frighten him any more than necessary, Aozora, insisted Nakano in a monotone voice as he glanced at the various flashing lights of the monitors built into the wall. Present Mike grasped Midoriya by his shoulders and, in a similar fashion to Aozora, stirred him into the studio, behind the door beside Nakano. Welcome to the studio, he announced, closing the door behind him. The studio looked very much like an extension to the room Midoriya had just left, which he assumed was some kind of waiting room. There was a table in the middle, with 4 chairs organized around it. Present Mike sat down in his, tapping the microphone that hung by his head and picking up the wireless headset. Pick a chair, any chair, he explained, indicating to the 2 remaining spaces. Midoriya took the one diagonal to him, closest to the door, which was a coincidence, and not a position he chose so he could escape at a moment's notice. That was only an added bonus, rather than the seat beside him, which was covered in various piles of paperwork and scripts, or the one opposite him, which was kind of behind his computer monitor. Midoriya had his own monitor, not that he understood anything on it. He decided it was best to be left along, evident by the fact that the only main control panel, sharing some similarities to Nakano's, was out of his reach. How are you feeling, little listener? Asked the hero in a much calmer voice than usual. A little nervous, Midoriya admitted, repeating what both Nakano and Aozora had said. He was actually rather surprised the words came out at all. That's okay, Present Mike replied, and expected. Everyone's nervous on their first time on the radio. I've had a lot of other visitors in before, even pro heroes freak out from time to time. They do. Yeah. Some heroes are more used to being filmed from afar. They can feel a little trapped in the studio. Can you believe it? Yes, he very much could. Anyway, I've got a song on at the moment. I made sure it was quite a long one. Don't worry. Look at your computer screen. See the word live in the top right-hand corner. Midoriya nodded, briefly distracted by the various notifications popping up all over the place. Okay, I've got the master controls over here. In a minute or so, the word live is going to glow bright red. That's how you know that your mic is on. He was just continuously nodding now, bobbing his head up and down as his brain went into overdrive. If you put your headphones on, not yet, you'll hear the music playing over the radio, Present Mike continued. We're going to be here for about an hour, but don't worry, I've got some really long songs queued up for you this time around, he laughed. When we go on the air, I'm going to introduce you and we'll just talk about stuff. Like having a normal conversation, that's all. Except thousands of people are also listening in at the same time, no biggie, thought Midoriya as he fiddled with his headphones in the stress of it all. What are you happy with me saying, kid? Questioned the hero. What do you mean? Midoriya stammered. Like, can I briefly describe your quirk? Say that you go to UA? He nodded hesitantly. I'm sure you know be best. Present Mike gave him a rather pitiful smile. His eyes flicked towards his monitor for a moment, probably checking how much longer he had left, before turning back to Midoriya. What are you thinking of, right now? Cast your thoughts of the radio aside. What else is buzzing around in that big brain of yours? He stuttered, unsure where his teacher was going with this. Well, Midoriya glanced at the closed blinds. He knew Aozora and Nakano were behind them. It's Aozora's quirk? Present Mike's grin grew wider. You know, she's never told me. She hasn't? Nope. I guess I could look it up, but where's the fun in that, huh? What do you think it is? She's got blue skin and sharp teeth? Is there some other element that's a little more hidden? Or sometimes mutational effects are as a result of underlying features. He carried on like this for a while, spouting out numerous possibilities for Aozora's quirk as Present Mike listened on in astonishment. He couldn't go on forever though. Well, actually, that was up for debate. Mainly because the song Present Mike was playing on the radio soon came to an end. Headphones on, little listener, he suddenly interrupted. Blinking, Midoriya was pulled from his thoughts. He hesitated, staring at the headphones, before gingerly pulling them over his head. They were rather comfortable, his own ones tended to hurt after a while, but with these he could see himself blocking the entire world out for the rest of the year. If they weren't connected to the radio, that was. He could hear the song ending, the headphones supplying clear audio quality. He let himself focus on that rather than the whole radio thing for a moment. That was when that little live button glowed red, and the hour he'd look back on many, many times in the years to come began. Put your hands up, radio. Thursday, 1830. Present Mix radio show. Present Mike, and the song is over. Wow, that is way longer than I thought it was. It's one of those songs where, about halfway through, you think it's ending, but then, surprise. It's not. Anyway, it's Thursday, and you know what that means. I have nothing planned. Thursdays are just one of those days, you catch my drift? You're tired from the week behind you and it's still not over. Like the song I just played, see what I did there? But this week specifically has been awfully tiring, isn't that right, co-host? Can I get a YWH? So host, away? Momentary silence followed by a splutter of laughter. Present Mike, that's got to be the most feeble yeah I've ever heard. Co-host, Present Mike, as most of you know, I am an English teacher at the well-known Hero School of UA. And boy has this week been long. My little co-host here is one of my many students. He may not be on the Hero course, but that doesn't mean his week's been easygoing. CO host, there was a lot of press outside the front G gate. Present Mike, indeed there was. Then we thought we got rid of them, but that horrible incident involving Hero Class 1A was the catalyst for a whole different kind of trouble. So, after school yesterday I go around the place checking that everyone's gone home, and who do I stumble across? Why, it's my co-host here. And he's singing, he's got an incredible voice. He's blushing now, don't give me that look. I feel bad. But, so, we talked, and he was mean to me, and I discovered, let me finish. I discovered he has this amazing quirk. I've never heard of anything like this before. And I'm not going to say much about it, because he's gone so red that I think he might explode. All I'll say is it's to do with his singing and it's awesome. Alright, I'm done. You don't need to raise your hand, this isn't a classroom. So host, what? I wasn't mean to you. I didn't mean to be mean. Present Mike, that was many memes right there. Anyhow, what you said was brilliant. Long story short, I am cockatoo now. So host, W's that mean? Present Mike, I can feel my co-producer cackling as we speak. So host, Present Mike, it's the hair. I don't know how I never noticed it before, but this little songbird right here is awfully observant. It can be a little scary at times. Just realized all our listeners are going to be very confused because they still don't really know who you are. So, since I'm cockatoo, this is Canary. Say hi. Canary, hi? Present Mike, you are very quiet. Canary, maybe you're just very loud. Present Mike, I don't think that's a maybe. Canary, so I balance you out? Present Mike, yeah, that's a good point. Canaries are usually quite noisy though. Canary, cockatoos are louder. Present Mike, are they? Trust you to know that. Have you conducted a study on what bird is the loudest? Canary, no. Present Mike, you know though, don't you? Canary, maybe. Present Mike, then enlighten you. Canary, it's the kakapo, a type of parrot? Present Mike, but why waste space in that big brain of yours for information on what birds are the loudest? Canary, because I wanted to know? The kakapo can reach around 130 decibels in its mating call, and then I think a type of bellbird reaches 100? But the sound of a jet engine can be 140 decibels. Present Mike, you learn something new every day. But why research birds? Canary, honestly? Present Mike, it's because you wondered how loud I could be before I burst someone's eardrums, wasn't it? Canary, possibly? Present Mike, how did I guess? Speaking of studying, When I bumped into Canary yesterday, he explained that he was trying to practice his quirk so he could make a good impression at this year's UA Sports Festival. All eyes are going to be directed towards the hero course, as per usual, but what most viewers fail to consider are the more background students in equally important courses, including the business, support, and general studies departments. As the yearly commentator, it's always super exciting when an underdog rises through the ranks. If they show promise in heroics, my colleagues at UA can consider offering them a place in the hero course, and that is where Canary is aiming. How are you feeling about it all? Canary, well, I probably won't do that well. I haven't had the practice or opportunities the others have had, but I can try my best. Present Mike, that's the spirit. I have invited Canary here today because, with a quirk like his, he needs confidence if he wants to succeed. It's no easy feat, standing in front of all those people and singing. But we all know a little encouragement can go a long way. That's why Canary's joined us here on Put Your Hands Up Radio. And if I haven't scared him off, maybe I can get him to come back. What do you say? A brief moment of silence follows. Present Mike, he shrugged. Everybody. That's not a no. Why don't the lot of you help him out? Send us in some questions and your thoughts. But in the meantime, have a little listen to this. Let the worries and stress of the day float away, and we'll be back soon when the song is up. The live light turned off milliseconds later. Midoriya let out a sigh of relief that he didn't even realize he was holding in as he took of his headphones. Present Mike didn't say anything initially. Midoriya had been bracing himself for an ear-piercing yell, but instead, he gave him a wide grin and an enthusiastic thumbs up. See, he began, that wasn't so bad. Was it? Midoriya cringed. I thought it was horrible. Not at all. Present Mike protested. First of all, you spoke. Midoriya blinked at him. It took a moment for the realization to wash over him. He was right. He just talked on the radio. The conversation had felt so natural that the dam between his mind and mouth had become obsolete. Sure, he stuttered and stammered, but he still spoke. Yeah, his teacher grinned, reading the stunned expression on Midoriya's face. What did I say? Confidence. I guess so. Present Mike pushed back off his desk, letting his wheelie chair carry him to the window. He tugged on the blinds to pull them up. Midoriya's gaze was immediately caught by Aozora and Nakano, who both had brilliant smiles on their faces. Nakano pressed one of the many buttons in front of him, speaking into a little microphone fixed in front of him. You did fine there, kid, he insisted. Really, I was worried that you wouldn't speak at all for a moment there, but you did good. Aozora leaned over, pushing Nakano out of the way to reach the microphone. Yeah, Canary. You're really sweet and everyone's going to love you. Trust me on this one. You'll have a fan base in no time. I will head it, guaranteed. What was that bird called? A kakawatsit. Present Mike strained to remember. Keikakapo, Midoriya replied nervously. How on earth did you remember that? I don't know. I just know a lot of random facts, he admitted with a shrug. But why? He cut himself off. Actually, no. We'll have this conversation on air. Wait a second, let me just see if we have any responses online yet. Present Mike pulled the blinds back down. Aozora kept waving, making her seat sink down as she was obscured from view. It made Midoriya's smile stretch a little further across his face. It wasn't long before the song came to an end and they were back on air. But there was a new life to Midoriya's, Canary's voice as the hour crept by. He remembered his mother's words from earlier that day. When you walk into that radio studio, you aren't Izuku anymore, okay? You're Canary. And Canary can be whoever you want him to be. You can be brave and kind and confident. Everything you are and more, everything you know you can be. Yeah, he could get used to this. The past few weeks had been the best of Midoriya's life so far, and that wasn't even an exaggeration. He'd never had so much to say to his dad during their Friday video chats. He told him all about Shinso, Uraraka, and Ida, how his problems with muteness had finally begun to fade, discovering his quirk, the USJ, talking with Present Mike, being on his radio show, becoming Canary. He had been pacing around the living room as he told his stories, speaking in such an animated way that he couldn't help but notice the shocked expressions of his prideful parents. It had been a while since he felt so happy. But it was strange, being able to write the word canary into an internet search engine and for results that didn't involve the bird or the island to appear. Of course, it had only been a one-time thing, so the mysterious being that was Canary wasn't that prevalent in the minds of the people of Japan. Being back at school again on Friday, it felt like everything was finally back to normal. He hung out with Shinso alone at lunch, bumped into Uraraka and Ida on their way back, who were walking with another of their Class 1A friends, who introduced herself as "Please call me Tsu Ajui." They briefly talked about their resilient teacher being back to lead them despite him being covered in bandages from the USJ attack, and they were on their way. Not a word about Canary was uttered in Midoriya's presence. In fact, the only reminder the situation had occurred at all was present Mike. The hero asked him to stay after class on Saturday, giving him a couple of business cards and phone numbers, before inviting him to have a proper tour of his hero agency the following Sunday, which he graciously accepted. So, of course Midoriya was surprised when, during his Sunday dance class, his new alter ego was finally mentioned. "Any of you guys listen to the radio on Thursday?" questioned Megumi, one of the very few remaining people in Midoriya's class. She was doing her stretches, sticking out her leg at horrendous angles like it was nothing. Then again, that was her quirk, an impossible flexibility. "No," replied Yudo. He was the only other boy apart from Midoriya. Then again, there were only 5 of them in total, so the genders were split pretty evenly, all things considered. "Thursdays are boring, remember? Didn't we have this discussion, like, a couple of weeks ago?" "Yeah, but not this Thursday," Kasumi interjected. "Oh, you listen too?" Megumi replied excitably. Midoriya was watching her stretches with morbid fascination as he tuned his guitar. Wasn't Canary just the sweetest? "Oh, Hiso was." "Hey Zuku, did you listen?" questioned Megumi. Midoriya hesitated, before nodding in reply. It was as close to the truth as he was happy to get. "Maybe you know Canary. He goes to UA after all." "Oh, this is a future hero, I presume?" asked the remaining member of the freestyle dance club, Mika. "He wants to be," Megumi contradicted, "but he's not on the hero course. He's got a singing quirk." "Odd," was all Mika said. "All right, everybody," announced Mrs. Kita, their dance teacher, who was still working despite being heavily PR'd. "Have you finished stretching?" The others nodded simultaneously as Midoriya's mind drifted away from the matter of Canary and back to his guitar. The Sunday dance lessons had always been Midoriya's favorite of the week. Saturdays were fine too, but they were right after school and often tired him out. The club was only allowed to run for half an hour on Sundays, and for as long as Midoriya could remember, the class had been impossibly small, and he'd been attending for years, even back when Mrs. Kita was still Miss Minami. He'd always liked their teacher, mainly because she knew sign language. His fellow dancers had changed over the last year though. As they moved to different schools, they ran out of time or, in some cases, they had moved to a new house entirely, now being too far away to attend their humble lessons. Despite this, they were all on first-name basis, mainly because Megumi was too insistent, and no one bothered complaining. However, talking? Well, Midoriya had started suffering from his muteness problem before Megumi joined. Yuta wasn't that bad, but he felt awkward around the other girls, and for some reason Midoriya as well. Kasumi had been there for a while, but she was very focused on dance, attending every class the little place had to offer. She often didn't speak at all, much like Midoriya, but grew a little friendlier once Megumi wormed her way into the girls' inner circle of friends. Mika was another story, incredibly beautiful and a wonderful dancer. She was the newest of the lot. Midoriya used to speak to some of them, but that had been a long time ago, and since Mrs. Kita knew sign language, he had just slipped into the habit of not talking at all. It was the same group on a Saturday, excluding Yudo, who was too busy with pursuing a future career in medicine to keep dancing. Midoriya did dance on a Saturday. But on Sundays, well, this was why he enjoyed it so much. On Sundays he played his instruments, whilst the others practiced their various routines to his tunes. He loved it. It allowed his to keep practicing despite giving up on his other lessons. It was the only reason he had kept going to both classes, and not just dropped one. You have your guitar this week, Izuku, realized Megumi, bouncing up and down. I haven't seen the guitar in ages. I thought you preferred your violin. I don't mind either, he signed in reply, and their teacher dutifully translated. She sat down beside him with a sigh, her hand on her growing belly. She had told them before that this was her favorite class of the week. They were just there for fun, excluding perhaps Kasumi, and were consequently very little work. She helped them with their choreography, improved their transitions and poise, gave them one-on-one tutorials if they so desired, but other than that, were very easygoing. What happened to it? Frowned Mika, glancing at the burnt spots over the wooden instrument. Midoriya gave her a weak smile and shrugged, hoping she wouldn't pry further. He really didn't want to have to explain that he'd set the rain on fire. Doesn't matter, interjected Megumi, who often came over as rude, although they all knew by this point that she never meant it. What song are you going to play? Midoriya hesitated, fiddling with the fret of his guitar in thought. Do you know Pompeii? Asked Kasumi, who positioned herself beautifully in the center of the room. We were doing a dance to it earlier. I could teach you all, she offered, eager at the chance to impress. Do you? Pressed Mika. Midoriya smiled and nodded in reply. He was trying to remember the first few chords when the door to the dance studio slammed open. Sorry I'm late, screamed the newcomer, who tossed her bag across the room. It slid to Midoriya's feet. His eyes caught the UA logo and slowly but surely he raised his gaze to meet that of the intruder. Bright pink skin, short hair, little horns and big black eyes. She was dressed in gym gear, tight-fitting leggings and a loose top implying a clear confidence in her form. The worst thing was, Midoriya recognized her. Ah, everyone, this is Mina Ishido. I'm the one who should be sorry, I almost forgot you were coming, smiled Mrs. Kita. Hey, no prob, miss. Mrs. Kita, lovely to meet you. The 5 members of the dance troupe stared at her, all completely frozen in rather bizarre positions. And to you too, the pink girl exclaimed. Hey, guys, you can call me Mina, everyone does. I usually go to the dance place a couple of streets down, but then I saw a flyer about freestyle dance and I was like, I'm so totally in. I do all sorts of stuff, but my studio has never offered a complete free-for-all. It just sounded so fun, so here I am. Kasumi glared at Mina, her nose held high, obviously disapproving of the newbie. Hi, exclaimed Megumi. Sorry, you rather surprised us. Mika here's the newest of us all, but she's hung around for 4 months. So, yeah, we're not that used to newcomers. Ah, sorry, she sang. She seemed to be in a good mood. Gosh, I'm full of apologies recently. I just came back from my other dance class. My friend told me about this cute guy on the radio, and we were listening to it and I completely forgot I was supposed to be here. It seems we were both at fault, added Mrs. Kita. Well, Mina, we were just about to start a new routine. Kasumi suggested Pompeii as the music. Do you have any other suggestions, or are you happy to begin? Oh, Pompeii? I know that song. It's great, really powerful, you get me? Well, interjected Kasumi harshly, Izuku's doing us a guitar cover, so it won't be exactly the same. Mina spun on her heel, turning to face Midoriya, processing his presence for the first time. Have we met? She began, narrowing her eyes and pointing at him. Midoriya shrunk back nervously. Izuku is mute, snapped Kasumi. She was still posed, ready to begin the dance. Oh! Mina shouted suddenly, oh my god! Do you go to U? You know Ochako Uraraka? Midoriya was starting to pray for the world to swallow him up at this point. 'Cause she's my classmate. She said she had a friend in class 1C with green hair and freckles and who was selectively mute. That's you, isn't it? You go to UA? Questioned Yudo. Oh yeah, she replied. Midoriya sighed in relief as the attention was taken away from him. I'm in the heroics course, class 1A, she exclaimed, punching the air. As in the class in that villain attack? The one and only. Mina answered with a hint of pride in her voice. She went on a rant about how they were all so totally terrified and how their teacher got all banged up but still turned up for class the next day. That was when Kasumi cleared her throat pointedly. "Do you think we could get on with the lesson?" she snapped. "We don't have long until our slot's up." "Sure. What are we doing then? Just whatever." The hero student frowned. "Well, I'm going to be showing the beginning of a dance that I have been working on in my ballet class." And the others were planning on mimicking some of the movements and adding their own style as the song progresses. That's how it usually works. "Go now, Izuku." Midoriya wavered for a moment, eyes flicking between Mina and his older dancemates. He hadn't felt so awkward and out of place at dance for a very long time. But despite that, he mustered the courage to sink into the familiar tune. "Ah!" Megumi exclaimed, a smile stretching across her face. "This is one of those ones you know really well, isn't it? I love it when we find these." "Like you said earlier, this is a little tamer than the original version, Kasumi," acknowledged Mrs. Kita, who was still struggling to untie the laces of her worn tap shoes. "So, you might want to relax your movements a little. Make sure to keep up with the tempo." Her prized student nodded surely, returning to the starting pose, making sure Mina could see her superior stance. As the first verse began, Kasumi gracefully moved into her dance, her face serious and her body controlled. The others watched her intricate twists and turns in awe, quite a contrast to the fiery meaning behind the song. It wasn't long before Megumi pranced to her own corner of the room, copying her friend's dance in a near-perfect mirror image, making up her own steps as she failed to predict what Kasumi would do next. As the song picked up, Yuto and Mika joined in. Yuto was as strong and Mika was delicate. Together they made a wonderful couple in dance. Although Midoriya was sure that the two were never together romantically, their dances tended to make him second-guess. Mina was absolutely ecstatic. She clearly didn't know where to look, her gaze rapidly changing direction as she flicked from Kasumi to Mika and the others. But then Midoriya caught her gaze in the mirrored walls, and her eyes were transfixed on only him and the way he played his guitar. She seemed to find it more entrancing than the grace the others portrayed. Then the chorus began, and Midoriya was rather stunned when it wasn't only Megumi's voice which filled the room, but Mina's as well. Neither of them were record label worthy, but they didn't seem to care, they were just enjoying themselves. "Does it almost feel like you've been here before?" they sang. Megumi was still dancing elegantly at Kasumi's side at this point, careful to give her friend enough space for her movements. Mina, meanwhile, was humming to herself, swaying back and forth and clicking her fingers in time to the beat. As soon as the chorus ended, the pink-skinned girl leapt into her own place in the hall with a surprisingly well-timed somersault. Her dance was far less graceful than the others, who were all following Kasumi's lead. Mina's movements were coordinated, but much faster and even a little robotic. "In your pose as the dust settled around us." The girl was breakdancing and somehow made it fit the music. It was quite a sight to behold. However, it was the music that Midoriya was focused on. He'd played the tune many times before, as Megumi had predicted, but never before had he felt so drawn to it. He didn't even realize he knew all the lyrics, but suddenly they were there, waiting on the tip of his tongue. "And as you close your eyes." Mina laughed, spinning and leaping in the joy she brought to the music. Midoriya so desperately wanted to join in, to sing along. It was a strange feeling, new to him. It had been a long time since he'd had to stop himself from talking, or singing, but that couldn't have been a good idea, to sing along. Not to this tune. No, he'd seen what he could do, setting fire to the rain was bad enough, at least no one was around. If he started singing Pompeii in a small, enclosed space, with other people around, who knows what could happen? Could he turn them all to ash, bring storm clouds of volcanic rock raining down upon them? Soon enough, the song came to an end, and the dance lesson drew to a close. Midoriya was packing away his guitar when Mina bounced over to him. "That was so cool," she exclaimed. "You're super good at the guitar. I think I actually prefer your guitar version to the actual song." Midoriya blushed and gave her a little bow. "Will you be coming back next week, Ashido?" questioned Mrs. Kita. "Sure. You guys do Saturdays too, right?" "We do. Will you consider coming to both? Well, if Saturdays are as awesome as today's lesson, then sure. I think I can make it. Then we'll see you then, the PRDNT woman smiled. Midoriya was walking out the door when Mina suddenly appeared by his side again, after handing in her starting fee. Ochako never mentioned you did music and dance, Mina acknowledged. I know I've said it already, but it's really awesome. Midoriya hesitated. Mina stopped walking as he did, a frown stretching across her face as Midoriya pulled out his phone. He tapped on the Notes app and began to write. Once he was finished, he handed the device over to his new dance partner for her to read. Can you not tell anyone at UA about this? I'd rather they didn't know, she read aloud. Ah, but it's so sweet. I'm sure everyone would think the same way. Midoriya shook his head surely, taking his phone back. Please, he added to the message. Mina sighed and smiled at him. Fine, on one condition. He pet his head to one side to show his interest. You give me your number, she announced dramatically. Midoriya flushed red and grudgingly gave his phone back to her so she could get the necessary details off it. There! Mina exclaimed as she finished exchanging details. Now we can talk without having to worry about speaking. He gave her a meek smile and texted, thank you to her. No prob, she laughed. I've got to go, or I'll miss my train. See you at school, guitar boy. And with that, the terrifying encounter was over. Midoriya stood there, in the street, for a few moments, slowly getting over his anxiety. That was when his phone vibrated again. He expected it to be Mina, who had inputted her name as Alien Queen in his phone, something that he supposed would be her future hero name, but instead it was his mother. Mum, where are you, Izuku? We're going to be late for the tour at the radio station. He gasped, fumbled with his phone, and then took off in the opposite direction to Mina as fast as his legs would carry him. His day wasn't quite over yet. His mum had been exaggerating when she said they would be late, as most mothers did. Midoriya still had time to change, have a shower and even have a quick bite to eat before the two of them left to get the train. Soon enough, they were standing inside the Hero Agency, waiting by the receptionist's desk. There he is, Tazora exclaimed as the elevator doors opened and she hurried into view. And you must be Mrs. Canary, she laughed. Inko Midoriya, yes? Yes, lovely to meet you, Inko smiled, shaking the blue woman's hand. Your son has got a real knack for the radio, it seems, Azora said, showing off her pointy teeth in a wide grin. He's only been on one show and our Thursday evening has never had so many replays online. Really? His mother replied in surprise. Really? Said one of the receptionists, the one who liked to give Midoriya finger guns as he walked by. People think you're sweet, and they're kind of invested in your story. Am I story? Midoriya repeated without thinking about it. Yeah, said Azora. You know I need more confidence so I can be brave enough to use my quirk in the biggest sporting event of the year and get into UA's hero course, she explained very quickly. And a future hero that sings? Yeah, honey, you're gonna have a fan base before you know it. Midoriya blushed and kicked at the floor. He was positive that he wouldn't be hanging around the radio station for long enough to get a fan base. Well, follow me, and we'll start our official tour. Azora finished, leading them back over to the elevator. She was telling his mother all about the White Noise team that she'd shown Midoriya last time as she tapped various buttons in the elevator. We've got 15 floors here, if you include ground level, she eventually explained. Some places are restricted, for example, floor 4 is for our underground heroes only, and you need a special card to access it. If I tried tapping floor flower, I would need to swipe my access card here. She pulled out an orange card from her pocket and tried to do exactly that, but the whole system just glowed red and canceled the elevator's destination. See? I'm not cleared for it. I can go most places, but not to the hero floors. Floor 5 is for overground heroes. I go there occasionally, but I'm not cleared to visit by myself. She ended up taking them to floor 3, revealing the hustle and bustle of lunchtime activity in a sort of break room. Sometimes we get heroes coming here to have lunch, she explained. They're not even from our agency, just good friends from this part of town. Did you know that we're considered the best news company to deal with hero interviews? It's because of Present Mix Overview, He makes sure we're not too intrusive, and consequently, we get the most business. So, where was the white noise team you mentioned? Inko asked curiously. Yeah, they're floors 7 and 8. I used to work there, so I still have clearance for floor 8, where they do all their call-ins and stuff, but floor 7's more private. Sometimes we take people there after they've rung our emergency lines. It's really quite homely. Next, the elevator doors opened on floor 11. This is our news station, she proclaimed proudly. They didn't stay there long. There were a lot of people hurrying around frantically from room to room, clearly in a rush. We're pretty busy at the moment, Aozora admitted. We're the official radio hosts of the UA Sports Festival, and of course, Present Mike always does the commentary. They're gearing up at the moment, hyping up the public, getting resources ready, the usual stuff. All this talk about the sports festival was giving Midoriya a headache. They were shown quite a few other floors after that, visiting the other radio areas as well as some of the offices. They even said hello to some of the heroes and sidekicks, which Midoriya was very happy about. Eventually though, after having a quick look at the offices on the top floor, because Aozora had to pick up a few things from her place, they were back at familiar floor 13, where Present Mix radio show broadcasted from. They sat down. In the waiting room outside the studio, Izuku and Inko sat together on one of the larger sofas whilst Aozora sat opposite them happily, leaving a small stack of papers on the table between them. "Don't mind that," she said as she caught Midoriya glancing at it. "It's not all about you." That didn't do much to lessen his nerves. "So," Aozora began, "how did you find your little Thursday introduction to the radio world?" Midoriya glanced between her and his mother hesitantly, before giving her a slight shrug. I guess it wasn't as bad as IT, though it would be B. Inko smiled proudly at him. Midoriya wasn't sure if that was because he didn't downright say it was terrible and he never wanted to do it again, or if it was because he actually spoke. Midoriya was quite proud of himself for speaking, considering what had happened earlier that day. "I'd say that was a positive response," Aozora concluded. She seemed rather pleased with herself. "As you can see, Sundays aren't very busy here." Midoriya wouldn't have guessed. There are less people commuting, so less listen to the radio. Present Mix out on patrol at the moment. But he should be back any minute to join us. Midoriya nodded in understanding. "Anyway, as I said earlier, you've got quite the potential as a little radio star," she grinned. "UA hero course aside, you'd do well here regardless." Inko grasped her son's hand, sporting a wide smile on her face. "You're new," Aozora continued to explain. "People like new things from time to time. Then there's your whole story like we said, and there's a certain mystery about you. Like, who is Canary? Did you know that question has been searched over 500 times over the last 3 days alone? And I seriously think that's an outdated number by now. I looked late last night." Midoriya blinked at her. It probably shouldn't have come as a surprise to him, but nevertheless, it did. "Moreover," she continued, waving Midoriya's surprise away, "you're young. People your age listen to our radio mainly because of our music hours, and of course, non-stop music Fridays. But when there's someone who they can relate to on the radio, then they're convinced to listen for a little longer, and they tell their friends, and then more people tune in. You see where I'm going with this?" He nodded hesitantly, still a little shocked by how much they all seemed to like him. "Basically, long story short, you're good for business. I know Present Mike brought you here to help build up your confidence, but now you've shown us what having someone like you on our show can do. We're more than happy to make this a permanent thing." The door was thrown open as Midoriya's mouth did the same. "Hilu," cheered an all too familiar voice, and Present Mike vaulted over the empty armchair beside Aozora, almost making it fall over, and sinking into it with a sigh of relief. After a moment, he leant forward, extending his hand to Midoriya's mother. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya. I'm Present Mike, Izuku's homeroom teacher," he exclaimed. Inko shook his hand meekly as Present Mike turned back to Aozora. "What did I miss?" "We were just talking about why your trial run was such a success." Aozora replied eagerly. "Ah yeah," he grinned widely. "Did Aozora tell you about our white noise team?" The three of them nodded. "Well, I just checked in with them, and I'm not going to say much because it's a private matter, but someone who called in with a problem today said they tuned into our radio for the first time and heard the number to call for help only after hearing about it from all the talk about you, he announced dramatically. Midoriya stared. It took a moment to process his words. Really? Yeah, he grinned. So, what do you say, Canary, want to come back again? He exchanged looks with his mother, whose prideful grin and excited nod convinced him to follow suit and gave his mentor a determined nod. All three adults cheered for him. Phew! Azora sighed. I was worried for a moment you were going to chicken out. Now that obstacle's out of the way, we've got one more to face. Present Mike continued, glancing at Azora's pile of paperwork. Well, maybe two. Yes, said the co-manager. The sports festival isn't far away, so if we want to build up your confidence enough in time, you might want to consider doing more shows than just the Thursday slot. And more? If it's not too much, the blue-skinned woman added hastily. It shouldn't be, said Inko. You have to keep Fridays free for your father to call in, he works abroad, she explained to them. Then other than that it's only Saturday and Sunday with dance class. You finished all your music lessons a while ago. Azora gasped. You dance? Okay, you're just too good for this world. Izuku was growing redder by the second. What about Tuesdays? Interjected Present Mike. Azora reached towards her papers, fumbled through them for a moment and eventually located what looked like a schedule. You might end up having other guests alongside the two of you, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem as long as you get them to sign a non-disclosure agreement about Canary's identity, which I'm presuming you aren't going to reveal until the sports festival? She looked to Midoriya for the answer, who simply nodded in confirmation. Great. Same time on Tuesdays then, that would work. How many shows is that before the sports festival then? The hero frowned. Well, the event itself is still a couple of weeks away, right? I think so. You're hosting it. 2 weeks away, right, got it? Azora sighed exasperatingly and turned back to Midoriya. That gives us 5 shows as long as you can join us on both Tuesdays and Thursdays? 6:30 to 7:30? After another look at his mother, Midoriya faltered before sealing his fate with a final, affirmative nod. His two, co-workers, he supposed, were absolutely ecstatic. This is going to be awesome. Trust me on this one, Canary, Azora grinned. Her smile was a little too wide to be natural. Maybe it had something to do with her quirk. Right, no, focus. It turns out they had already planned on Midoriya saying yes, and had nearly everything in place. The paperwork which Azora now spread across the desk for both Midoriyas to look over was almost complete, only lacking the 2 signatures here and there. As it turned out, Present Mike had gone to Principal Nedzu about the whole situation and had gotten official permission from the school to let Midoriya actually work at the radio station. Midoriya hadn't realized he was really getting a part-time job here, with a decent pay and everything. Well, at least it helped pay for his train tickets back and forth from the radio station, and perhaps he could start paying for his dance lessons too. Anything to help his mother out. It wasn't long before Canary was an official member of Put Your Hands Up Radio. Midoriya was clutching an orange card, similar to Azora's, as he was led all the way back down to reception, with clearance to all radio-related areas, and a particular door that the co-manager had yet to show him through. Now this, she grinned, is called the back door. She threw it open to reveal an ordinary corridor, leading all the way to the back of the building. I just realized I said that really dramatically, but I was being serious. It's literally the back door. As Izuku and Inko were signed out of the building, Azora ushered them through the back door, closing it behind her. When she opened the final door at the end of the empty corridor, Midoriya didn't quite know what he had been expecting. It revealed a long metal staircase, which made plenty of noise as they hurried down it to a very narrow street, concealed behind the towering building, amongst what seemed like ordinary, residential buildings. The back door is a secret to the general public, Azora told them in a theatrically hushed voice. So, you're going to have to keep it quiet for us. It's a bit of a long-winded way into the building, but it avoids any hustle and bustle out front. It's especially useful for big-time celebrities who are trying to avoid the press at the main entrance to the agency. With that key card of yours, you can unlock it from the outside. I thought it might be a useful thing to show you, if you want to keep that secret identity of yours, she cackled. Before long, the three of them reached a rather quiet road, lined with the occasional, rather empty shop, and one very quaint cafe. From the street, they could barely see the rooftop of the building they had just left behind. Not one of the few passers-by gave them a second glance as they went about their everyday lives. It was the perfect escape route for a busy hero. "We can't thank you enough," said Inko, bowing before Aozora, and Izuku quickly did the same. No, thank you," she insisted, giving them a bow too. "This is going to be a real wild ride, I can already tell, and I'm more than happy to be a part of it." "I'm not sure if I am yet," Midoriya muttered. Aozora howled with laughter. Maybe she had super hearing, he had been very quiet. He didn't even realize he'd said that out loud, which was a revelation he hadn't come across in a while. "Well, I'll see you on Tuesday then, Canary. Hey, check out the website tomorrow, we'll update it to show the new schedule as soon as we can." And without any more of a goodbye, a satisfied Aozora turned on her heel and literally skipped back up the alleyway. The two Midoriyas stared at her for a moment or so, even after she had vanished from view. Inko then pulled on Izuku's sleeve, tears budding at the corner of her eyes as she pulled him into a hug. She needn't say a word to express her feelings as they held each other there. Izuku melted into the warmth of her familiar hold, a wave of relief washing over him now the stress-invoking encounter had come to an end. But he couldn't help but let a smile creep across his face, for despite all his worries, he knew this was only the beginning. Or, in Aozora's terminology, the beginning of a real wild ride. Midoriya had 2 new notebooks. One, he'd mentioned before, titled Quirk Analysis, was just that, analysis on his quirk. He discovered a lot of new things ever since he'd started officially practicing after school hours. Although Midoriya had yet to speak to the elusive Principal Nedzu, he had been permitted to use that sports hall for himself for 1 hour after school whenever he could, meaning Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays, because his dad didn't call until a little later on a Friday evening anyway. Present Mike oversaw a few of them. He felt more than a little nervous, singing in front of people. That was probably why the hero started timing his arrival so that he only appeared when Midoriya was in mid-song. It felt a little less awkward then. Whilst most of that notebook involved information on what a particular song could do, the most important pages at the moment were those detailing the specifics of his ability, or more accurately, his limitations. And he'd made some very interesting discoveries in the short space of time that he'd had his quirk. He put that down to putting so much energy into researching other quirks, so when it came to his own, it was a piece of cake. Quirk name, Songbird Living Song Music, something. By singing a song, an ability is granted for the user to manipulate to their will whilst the song continues. The more practice put into a particular song, the longer effects last after the song has finished, the stronger it is, and the shorter the cooldown effect is between uses. Cooldown. If an ability is used, and the song is then sang again immediately after, the quirk will not activate. The cooldown PRD starts as soon as the power turns off, whether that be because the song was interrupted or stopped partway through, or because the song came to an end. A new song has a cooldown length of roughly 72 hours, 3 days, which decreases slowly as the song is practiced, but there will always be some kind of cooldown. For example, the song Wings, which I have used on numerous occasions, still has a limit exceeding 24 hours, and that time span is decreasing at a much slower rate than how it began. Abilities. Abilities vary from song to song, depending on how the user interprets the song themselves. Someone may think a song has a different meaning, but it relies solely on the user's opinion. Only one ability can be used per song. Mashups seem to have no effect as several songs are used at once. As soon as one song is stopped, its power stops working. Its only benefit is being able to transition quickly from one ability to another at a higher power level than just starting a new song again. The strength of an ability increases as the song progresses, following how the music swells. It's at its strongest near the end of the song and in choruses. I can use an ability if I skip straight to the chorus, but it will be weaker and the same cooldown PRD applies. Some songs grant the same ability but at slightly different power levels and have varied applications. Other songs seem to give no power at all, especially if they're super short or have few lyrics. Some just don't give powers for some reason. If I don't feel a connection to the music, or dislike it in any way, shape or form, my quirk won't activate. If I forget a lyric or do something wrong, that counts as interrupting the flow of the music and the power shuts off. The cooldown PRD beginning. Lingering effects. If a song ends uninterrupted or I purposely stop it at a suitable point, like when the chorus finishes, the ability the song grants can last even whilst not singing. Lingering effects cut off if I try to start using another song. The power lasts longer the more I practice a particular song. Affecting other people. My quirk currently has 3 directions from which it can be easily applied. Some songs only work on me, only giving me control. For example, songs with fire abilities, only I can control the fire. Some songs affect anyone the sound reaches, excluding myself, for example, sleeping songs. It works as long as the sound reaches them, so plugging ears doesn't help. Some songs affect everyone including myself, such as strength-enhancing abilities. I believe I will have more control over this with more practice. For example, I might be able to focus a power onto only one person even whilst others are listening. This has only worked once before, where I was able to make a song which should have affected everyone but me, give the ability to only myself. Granted, it wasn't very useful and I fell asleep, but that doesn't matter. My quirk doesn't work through recordings or amplifiers. If I use a microphone, anyone who is close to me is still affected, but people who are far away enough so that they can only hear because of the amplification are not affected. If you use too many songs in a short time span, you will be fatigued. It seemed confusing at first. Well, there was rather a lot of information on it written down here. But once you read through it, it became clear that much of the information was simply repeated in several different scenarios. And, in actual fact, there was a certain simplicity to Midoriya's quirk. But perhaps that was something only he could see. It was his power after all. He still felt giddy just thinking about that. But Midoriya had 2 notebooks. We're just going to ignore the other 13 hero analysis notebooks and focus on these 2. The other notebook he had dubbed his panic book. Well, that would be because he turned to it when he panicked. Another reason would be because everything he did now revolving Canary turned into a panic. The third and final reason was that it was what Aozora called it when she saw him jotting stuff down in it as he sat nervously in the waiting room before his second show. On the very first page of the notebook, he had written a to-do list. It was rather high-aiming, but he hadn't planned on anyone ever seeing the inside of this notebook, so that fact didn't apply. Practice and analyze your quirk until you know it as much as anyone who might have had their quirk for 10 years would, i.e. like an ordinary person. Gain your confidence on the radio until you are able to talk without hesitation on air. Convert that confidence to real life so talking to ordinary people in reality isn't a challenge. Take that confidence a step further so you can happily sing without any anxiety issues. Tell Shinso. Take part in the sports festival. Make a good enough impression to allow you to be offered a place in the hero course. Transfer to the hero course. Yes, number 5 was rather important. He also might have to consider moving that number up the list. Something he had not predicted, although probably should have, was how popular the character of Canary would really end up being. "Hey, Canary!" Aozora yelled. Midoriya looked up from his notebook. He was perched on the armchair nestled in the furthest corner of the room. If he was going to be staying here, then that armchair would be his, no questions asked. Present Mix just put the song on. You're on in 3 minutes and counting. Get your feathers in there, she finished, talking rather loudly because her headphones were still over her head as she bobbed side to side to whatever tune was drifting across the radio. Midoriya took a deep breath, something he often found himself doing before big events, and stood up, leaving his things in a pile surrounding his armchair. It was already starting to resemble a bird's nest, and Canary had only claimed the space less than half an hour ago. Present Mike did a celebratory spin in his chair when Midoriya entered the room. He was in his hero costume this time, most likely because he had to wear it at UA and hadn't taken it off yet. Midoriya still wasn't too sure how to handle himself in the studio, how much noise he was supposed to be making, where he could go, what he could touch without ruining the entire show. This was why he was as quiet as he could be, almost tiptoeing across the room towards the same chair he chose last time. He could never be too careful. How are you feeling, my little listener? Wait, no, you're not really a little listener anymore, are you? Let's make that my little co-host until I can find a better alliteration, huh? The hero laughed. Fine, Midoriya stammered as he sat down. You don't sound fine. Present Mike retorted. He was pointing at him, his fingers so close to Midoriya's nose despite the width of the table that it was almost touching it. You sound all panicked again. Where's the happy canary we left off with last time, huh? Midoriya gave him a meek smile. Sometimes I hear people talking about me. And I know all those people are going to be listening today, and I'm really worried that maybe they won't like me anymore and this will just end up being one big disaster and I'm going to mess up and… Whoa. Present Mike interrupted. You're going to give yourself a panic attack, and no one wants that. Midoriya's hands were shaking as he fiddled with the headphones that were laid out before him. He wasn't sure if he was more nervous the second time around as he had been the first, but either way, what he was feeling was certainly far from good. You're not going to mess up, continued Present Mike. He had adopted his calmer voice, the one he used when addressing panicked civilians and, more often than not, Midoriya. He'd come to recognize it well now. People like you for being. So, you don't need to worry about messing up, because there's nothing to mess up. We're going to do exactly what we did last time, so there's no need to fear, alright? The only difference is we've actually got some questions lined up and a bit more of a plan. Just follow my lead and I promise you'll do absolutely great. Midoriya let a small smile creep back over his face. You know, I've got a stellar way to deal with anxiety for those who have a bit of a problem with it, the hero told him. Midoriya blinked up at him. He took that as an expression of interest. Turn your fear into excitement, he said dramatically. Think about all these negative emotions that you're feeling and say, hey, you know what? This doesn't have to be negative. Say, I'm not shaking because I'm nervous, it's because I'm excited. I'm excited to begin. To get this other with whatever floats your boat. He frowned at his teacher. Well, like his mother had said, here, in the radio studio, he wasn't Izuku, he was Canary. Izuku may be nervous, but Canary could be excited. Perhaps separating the two wasn't the best idea, but for now, it was a way forward, and Midoriya was running rather thin on those. Midoriya's smile grew that little bit wider. Okay. Present Mike clapped his hands. There he is. There's the canary I was waiting for. Just keep being you and roll with it. Put your headphones on, Songbird. Listen to the end of this song with me and then we can start. Present Mix Radio Show. Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1830 to 1930. Canary's Hour. Present Mike. A brief moment of silence follows. Present Mike. Can I get a yeah from Canary? Canary. Why? Present Mike. This is becoming routine and you know what? We're going to stick with it. Anyway. A big fat welcome to a new official segment of Put Your Hands Up Radio. We talked about it earlier, but here we are. Welcome to Canary's Hour. Canary? Really? Present Mike. Canary? It's named after Emmy? Present Mike. Well, you are the whole reason we're doing it. Canary. Thank you? Present Mike. Why are you saying thank you? A faint squeal is heard. Canary. Why are you so loud? Present Mix howling laughter can be heard, most likely quietened from its original volume. Canary. He's really loud. I've been listening to his radio show forever. And I don't know why, but I didn't expect him to be so loud in real life. Present Mike continues to laugh uncontrollably. Canary. Oh, of course, the volumes all changed on your end of the radio. But here I can still hear how loud he is. And I keep reaching up to my ears to cover them with my hands, but then the headphones are in the way and I press them closer to my face and it gets even louder and it's just a vicious circle of decibels really. A moment of silence is endured as Present Mike recovers. Canary, are you okay? Present Mike sighs loudly. Present Mike, he looks like a little ball of sunshine, but in reality he has a cruel side. I feel like we're bringing out the worst in him. But then, I remember he's Canary and he'll never change. Canary, tell us a fact. Canary, did you know the loudest sound ever recorded was the explosion of the volcano Krakatoa in 1883? Present Mike. That was a very quick response. I guess you were thinking about that already? Canary. Aha. Apparently the sound traveled around the world 4 times and ruptured the eardrums of people standing over 40 miles away. Present Mike. Huh? How many decibels does it need to be to burst eardrums? Canary. Should you know that? Present Mike. Of course I do. But you know everything, so I was just checking if you knew. Canary. I don't know everything. Like how loud a sound needs to be to burst your eardrums, for instance. Present Mike. Well then looks like we're moving on. Canary. Wait, but isn't it a bit of a problem that you don't know how loud you can? Present Mike. We have some questions to get to. Canary. But I have a question. Present Mike. You don't need to raise your hand, and if it's about noise, I don't want to hear it. A brief moment of silence follows. Present Mike. Yeah, you lower that hand. Anyway, as I said, we still have plenty of questions from you wonderful listeners from last Thursday and the time in between. So, we thought that we could start off our first official Canary's Hour with a Canary questionnaire. Canary. WR? Present Mike. This. So, if Canary could so kindly turn to his screen, yes, that one, you will see your list of questions. Canary, are we answering all of these? Present Mike. Probably not. Canary. Okay, do I just pick one or? Present Mike. Pick and click. Canary. Okay. I'll just click on something random then. Present Mike. Our first question then. Canary. So, is this from Twitter or? Present Mike. We get most of our questions from social media. We should set you up an account. Actually, let's do that on air in a minute. That would be great. Canary. Okay, but, this question is from White Wave. Present Mike. And they say, from someone who's bad at people. My new favorite phrase. You sound like if a puppy got turned into a human being. Distant, barely audible squeaks can be heard. Present Mike. He's doing that thing now where he goes really red and curls up in a ball, and there he goes. Yep, he's turned his chair away from me. Right? White Wave's question, getting to the point, is, can you sing? Is your cork really good pitch? Well, little listener, that is a good hypothesis. However, even though that would be cool, I can't see how it could be useful in heroics. Canary. Oh, pitch control would be really cool, depending on how well you could manipulate it. If you go high enough and are able to direct your voice, you could do things like shatter glass and knock people out, and that would be awesome, but I can't do that. Present Mike. But he can sing. And really well. And he's returned to the ball. Canary. Canary. The next question is from Lil Gnome, and they ask how old you are. Are you happy saying that on air? Undistinguishable muttering is heard. Present Mike. Can we repeat that? Canary. I think I'll just let you guess. I'm either in my second or first year at UA. Present Mike. Let's have one more question before our next song then. Canary. Oh, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. So sorry if it's wrong, but Didrakinio? Is that right? You asked, huh? How would you describe Presentation Michael as a teacher? Present Mike. I'm not liking where this is going. Canary. Well, firstly, loud. Present Mike. And we've gone in a full circle. Canary. Secondly, I'm just deciding what is a good idea to say now that he's sitting opposite me. Present Mike. And what's that supposed to mean? Canary. He's very charismatic. A moment of silence. Present Mike. I'm not sure how that is an insult, but I bet it is. Right, song. We're going to go to a song before he rats out all my teaching secrets. Canary. There was a paper aeroplane stuck in his hair for our entire lesson the other day. He didn't even notice. Present Mike. Cue the music. Present Mike was smiling because Midoriya was smiling. It was infectious. See? Yamada began. What did I tell you? Everyone loves you. Midoriya took off his headphones, still smiling broadly as he glanced at the remaining questions on his screen, and there were a lot of them. I didn't tell you earlier because I didn't want you to freak out more than you were already, he continued. That got Midoriya's attention, making him look up in surprise, his smile quickly fading. Don't worry. It's a good thing, we've got a very high listener count today. I'm talking way more than what was on last Thursday. And they're here because they want to hear you. And judging by the fact that the number isn't going down but is instead steadily increasing, I would say you're giving them exactly what they want. The smile crept back across his face. Thank you. For what? For giving me a chance and being so nice to me. Even before I had a quirk, I've never had a teacher who has put this much time and effort into helping me, he admitted, twisting back and forth in his chair, avoiding Yamada's gaze. He didn't say anything for a moment, processing Midoriya's words. He hadn't really put much thought into Midoriya's past before, but then it clicked. He was mute because he was quirkless. People saw the small, quirkless boy and wrote him off before he had a chance to show him he was so much more than his condition. He was smart, kind and funny. He had a big brain and an even bigger heart, if that were possible. But despite all that, no one had really cared before. And so, the kid must have fell silent, slipped into the shadows, unnoticed. Perhaps it was even worse than that. He could have done it on purpose, as a way of avoiding the attention. Maybe it wasn't just dance lessons that made him excellent at evading dodgeballs. Midoriya wasn't the first kid he'd brought with him on the radio. There had been a few in the past who needed a little confidence boost. Several refused the offer, but the ones who took it up were rather thankful for it. Despite all that though, none had been quite so popular with the radio's audience than Canary. Azor was right, it wasn't just his personality, people liked the story, they were eager to see what he would become. Present Mike felt the same way, but he also couldn't help but think about what could have happened had he not gone and spoken to Midoriya that day in the sports hall, had Midoriya never even discovered his quirk. What would have happened to him? What would his future have looked like? Present Mike, sir? Yamada blinked. Sorry there, co-host, got lost in my own world for a second. He smiled fondly. Screw him, he was very guilty of favoritism. Then again, one could say he just wanted to give Midoriya as good a shot at life as everyone else had, or maybe a little beyond that. Hey, plus ultra. You're a real good kid, Canary. Awesome quirk or no, you're gonna make an amazing hero. Midoriya's smile wobbled a little. Thanks, Cockatoo. Oh, I'm Cockatoo again now, am I? He rubbed his eyes, laughing and nodding. Well then, I accept my fate. Present Mike, and welcome back. Canary, yay. Present Mike stifles his laughter. Present Mike, what is with that yay? Anyway, I thought we'd shake things up a bit. Canary, oh no. Present Mike, oh yes. Here's the deal, listeners, you're gonna pick up your phones and call us in. One of my lovely friends in the control room. Canary, that makes it sound like we're in at our rocket launch. Present Mike, well who knows with your quirk. Canary, yet true. Present Mike, we're just going to leave that there and confuse you all. You'll find out what his quirk really is at the sports festival. Canary, I'm terrified. Present Mike, you'll be fine. Canary, well, everyone knows my quirk's to do with singing. So what if it doesn't quite work for some reason? I could be standing in the middle of the arena, singing, and my quirk doesn't activate and I'll just look like an idiot. Present Mike, don't be so pessimistic. Canary, I would say that was me being optimistic enough to assume I even make it to the tournament round. Present Mike, okay, we're going to go to the caller before Canary digs himself into a pessimistic pit. Canary, a what? Present Mike, okay, the number to call is 555-100. Author's note, this is the legendary fake number and I haven't checked it, pretty sure it's still fictional. And no, I don't care if it doesn't match up to any Japanese regions and isn't a complete number. Muzutafu is a fake My Hero Academia place, a name taken from Star Wars. Of course it doesn't have an official area code. The other number eventually mentioned is also fake. I just didn't want to write XXXXXX because I thought it was weird. Sorry, please do carry on. Canary, that W was very fast. Present Mike, you say it then. Canary, 555-100. Present Mike, 555-100. A brief moment of silence follows. Canary, what? Present Mike, Cue the ringtone. The ringtone dial is heard. Canary, but wait, if they're calling us, why is there a ringtone? Present mic, don't question my logic. Listener, hello? Present mic, why ye? You little listener, have made it all the way to put your hands up radio. Listener, yay. Oh my goshness, so cool. Present mic, say hi, Canary. Canary, you hi? A faint squeal is heard. Listener, hi. I'm Cuny. Present mic, nice to meet ya, Cuny. Where are you in this exact moment? Listener Cuny, oh, I'm on the train, going to my friend's house. Present mic, that explains the rumbling noise. Anyway, do you have a question for us, Cuny? Listener Cuny, sure. Hi again, Canary. Canary, hi. Listener Cuny, I was wondering, if you're aiming to be a hero, what kind of hero do you want to be in particular? Present mic, oh, that's a good question. Listener Cuny, thank you. So, like underground or rescue or? I'm aiming for rescue. Myself, and I totally wouldn't mind having a sweet little burb like you as a coworker. Present mic, what do you say, baby? Canary, well, I don't really know. I guess it depends on how I use my quirk. I'm not sure if underground would work out too well. I think it might be difficult sneaking up on someone whilst singing. Listener Cuny, oh yeah, that's a good point. Canary, be bearing in mind I'm not actually on T the Hero course. Present mic, yet. Canary, why? Present mic, anyway, a big thanks to Cuny for phoning in. Listener Cuny, oh my gosh, seriously, thank you so much for having me. Present mic, you have a song suggestion for us while we're here? Listener Cuny, there. Rocket Man by Elton John. Canary, T that was because of earlier, wasn't it? Listener Cuny, oh, and before I go, I'm sure you'll do really well in the sports festival. I'll be rooting for you. Canary, T thank you. Present mic, bye Cuny. Listener Cuny, bye. Canary, G goodbye. Present mic, but before we play that wonderful suggestion, we have another number to read out. Canary, oh yeah. Present mic, our hero hotline is a wonderful number that you can call if you need help. Of course, the real emergency number is obviously the priority, but if your problem is a bit more of a delicate situation, ring us up and we'll help you out the best we can. Even if it's not an immediate emergency, or you're having some tricky mental health dilemmas, we'll do the best we can to give you the support you need. And Canary is here with the number. Canary, it's 5559. Present mic, did you just say that from memory? Canary, maybe. Present mic, that was 5550. And with that, to the rocket ship. Before long, the radio show had come to an end, and with the final song put on for all to hear, Midoriya took off his headphones, wandered out of the studio, and collapsed onto his newly claimed armchair in a heap. Present Mike laughed as he exited after him, turning off the lights inside the studio as he went. This was Present Mick's private place. After his shows were over for the night, his other coworkers on the floor below them would take over for late-night broadcasts. Present Mike was a hero, a radio presenter, and a teacher. He knew how to manage his time to ensure that everything got done, but, consequently, some things were sacrificed. One of those being not hosting Put Your Hands Up Radio 24/7. Someone's a little tired, Azora laughed. She was doing paperwork on one of the sofas near Midoriya whilst Nakano continued to manage the logistics of the end of the show, likely passing controls over to the news station. It's just been a long time since I've done so much talking, Midoriya admitted, feeling his throat gingerly. It hadn't been so bad the Thursday before, but all this radio show business was really starting to get to his poorly used voice box. Then I have just the thing for you. Present Mike cried. He disappeared as Midoriya cautiously removed his hands from his ears once more, only for him to return, moments later, at an equally high volume. Here you go, Canary. He thrown a small bag into Midoriya's lap. Frowning, Midoriya carefully undid the drawstring and looked inside. Throat lozenges? Not just any throat lozenges. Ones that actually taste nice. Azora pulled a mockingly shocked face. Honestly though, they're amazing. They work super well. Azora, Why are you here? Midoriya questioned as he unraveled one of the lozenges. I thought you had your own office? Yeah, but you're here, and I wanted to see you. Midoriya couldn't suppress his smile as he put the lozenge in his mouth. Present Mike was right. They actually did taste nice. You can keep that bag if you want, he offered. I have many. For medicinal uses only, not just because you eat them like sweets, Nakano insisted as he finished up his work. Yes, of course, Present Mike nodded, waving off the comment. Midoriya smiled as he packed his various things away, checking his pocket for his orange key card. Thank you all for everything, he said for the 100th time as he almost skipped towards the elevator. Bye-bye, Canary, Tazora called out as the elevator doors closed. And if you say thank you one more time I swear I will? She didn't get to finish that sentence, and Midoriya's mind was left to comedically finish it as he wandered home. He left via the front door as no one seemed to be outside to see him go, and practically ran all the way to the train station, eager to get home to his mother's cooking. She had promised katsudon.